Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Brandon Walsh found Emily Watson's GoPro half buried in sand at the mouth of Orderville Canyon. Its case cracked but the SD card intact. The last file timestamp read 6:47 p.m., 31 hours ago, and when he played it on the camera's tiny screen, his hand started shaking before the 10-second mark. Emily's face filled the frame, eyes wide, whispering, "Brandon, if you find this..." Then the camera jerked sideways and captured something running on four legs that briefly stood on two, something with a coyote's body and a man's hands. Something that turned toward the lens with Emily's own face looking back at her from a wolf's skull before the recording cut to black. Brandon had been a ranger at Zion National Park for 8 months. Transferred from Colorado after the Cascade Fire Department decided his PTSD made him a liability. 2 years since he'd watched 3 of his crew burn when the wildfire jumped the containment line. 2 years since he'd been the only one who made it out of that canyon, lungs scorched, skin blistered, alive when better men weren't. The nightmares still came every third night like clockwork. The smell of burning pine, the sound of Danny screaming into the radio as the flames closed in, the way Michaels had looked at him with something like forgiveness right before the smoke took him. The therapist in Denver had suggested exposure therapy in a controlled environment. Working in national parks, surrounded by wilderness but away from active firefighting, Brandon had laughed, bitter, sharp, and taken the Zion posting because running away to Utah felt more honest than pretending therapy would fix what was broken. Now he knelt in sand that radiated heat even at 7:30 a.m., the GoPro growing slick in his palm as sweat mixed with the fine red dust that covered everything in the Narrows. Emily Watson had been missing for 37 hours. 23 years old, seasonal naturalist, enthusiastic about desert ecology to the point of annoying the permanent staff with facts about cryptobiotic soil. She'd signed out for a solo day hike to Orderville Canyon yesterday morning. Permit good until 7 p.m., expected back at the visitor center by nightfall. When she didn't return, Brandon had volunteered for the search before anyone asked. Something about Emily reminded him of his younger sister. Same determined optimism, same assumption that the world was fundamentally safe if you just followed the rules and respected nature. His sister had never seen him after the fire, had never watched him wake up screaming, had missed the 6-month period where he couldn't look at a candle without his pulse spiking to 140. Brandon played the video again, 40 seconds total. Emily's whisper, "Brandon, if you find this, don't come looking for me. There's something wrong in Orderville. The tracks I've been following, they change. Coyote prints becoming human, human becoming something else. I know how that sounds, I know. But I saw it. Saw something wearing a cougar's body stand up on 2 legs and speak with my father's voice. It knew things, Brandon. Private things Dad said to me before he died. It shouldn't be possible, but..." The camera movement, sudden and violent, Emily running, her breathing ragged, a flash of canyon wall, of sky, of something pale and wrong moving with that horrible 4 legs then 2 gait. The thing turning, and for one crystal clear frame, Brandon could see what Emily had seen. A wolf's skull atop a human spine, the jaw working in patterns that mimicked speech, and set in those empty eye sockets, Emily's own eyes, her exact hazel green with the ring of gold, staring at her from something that had stolen her face. Then nothing. Black screen, file corrupted or deliberately ended. Brandon's radio crackled. "Walsh, this is base. You at the Orderville Junction yet?" He keyed the transmit. "Affirmative. Found Watson's GoPro. Last footage is disturbing. Requesting additional SR personnel and..." He paused. And what? Report that the video showed a shape-shifting creature? He'd be pulled off the search, sent for psychological evaluation, probably fired. And possible wildlife encounter. Something spooked her badly. Copy. What kind of wildlife? Brandon looked at the canyon ahead, at the slot where Orderville Creek carved through Navajo sandstone, walls rising 1,000 feet on either side. The Narrows section was one of the most dangerous hikes in Zion, flash flood potential, extreme heat, limited escape routes. And according to every geological survey, every ranger report, completely safe from predators beyond the occasional rattlesnake. Unknown, he said finally, proceeding into Orderville to continue search. Negative, Walsh. Weather Service is calling for afternoon thunderstorms. Flash flood risk is elevated. Return to base. Brandon thought about Emily Watson, 23 years old, alone in a slot canyon with something that wore animal bodies and spoke with dead men's voices. Thought about Danny and Michaels and the third man whose name he still couldn't say aloud, about being the one who survived while better people died. "I'm losing signal," Brandon said into the radio, then switched it off before dispatch could respond. The Orderville Canyon entrance was a narrow cleft in red sandstone, the creek running clear and cold despite the brutal July heat. Brandon's pack held 3 liters of water, emergency bivvy, first aid kit, rope, headlamp, and his personal gear, Garmin InReach mini satellite communicator, iPhone with offline maps, backup battery pack. The GoPro went into a waterproof case on his chest rig. If he found something, he wanted evidence. The canyon swallowed him within 50 feet. Temperature dropped 20 degrees in the shade, the walls so narrow in places that Brandon had to turn sideways to squeeze through, his pack scraping sandstone. The creek ran ankle-deep here, the current gentle, the sound of water echoing in strange harmonics off the curved walls. At the half-mile mark, he found the first print. Human foot, bare, pressed into wet sand. Normal. Then 10 feet later, the same foot but elongated, toes stretched into something more like claws, the heel narrowed. Then 10 feet beyond that, a coyote's paw print, except the dew claw was wrong, positioned like a human thumb, with the articulation to grasp. Brandon photographed each print with his iPhone, the camera struggling in the mixed light of deep shadow and reflected glare. His hands were steady. That was good. During the bad months after the fire, his hands had shaken constantly, fine tremor that made it impossible to hold coffee without spilling. A sound echoed from deeper in the canyon. Voice, human, calling his name. "Brandon, Brandon, help me." Emily's voice, but wrong. The cadence too perfect, the desperation too performed, like someone reading from a script about what fear should sound like. Brandon's throat closed. The fire had sounded like that too. A roar that was almost voice-like, almost intelligent, like something that understood what it was consuming. He moved forward, one hand on the bench-made folding knife on his belt. Stupid. What would a knife do against something that could reshape its skeleton at will? But the weight was comforting anyway. The canyon widened into a pool, waist-deep, the water so clear Brandon could see his shadow on the sandy bottom 15 feet down. On the far side, Emily Watson sat on a rock ledge, her hiking clothes soaked, her hair plastered to her skull, her face turned toward him with an expression of profound relief. "Brandon, oh thank God. My ankle. I think it's broken. I've been stuck here since yesterday. Did you get my camera? Did you see the footage?" Brandon stopped 20 feet away, water swirling around his thighs. His pulse was doing that thing again. The rapid acceleration that meant his body had recognized danger before his brain processed it. "Emily?" he said carefully. "Yes. Who else would it be?" She laughed, too loud, the sound bouncing off canyon walls in overlapping waves. "I'm so glad you came. Everyone else would have turned back because of the flood warnings." "Stand up," Brandon said. "I told you my ankle. Stand up. Now." The thing wearing Emily's face smiled, and the expression was almost right but not quite. The muscles pulling in sequences that suggested someone learning to operate a face from the inside. It stood smoothly, no limp, no hesitation, and Brandon saw that its feet were wrong. Human toes, but too long, the joints bending backward slightly. "You're not her," Brandon said. "No," it agreed, and Emily's voice fractured into harmonics, multiple tones speaking in unison. "But I wore her for a while. Warm girl. Tasted like sunscreen and fear. She fought longer than most, kept screaming about how this wasn't scientifically possible. The thing laughed with Emily's mouth. Science. Such a fragile construct. Your people explain away what you don't understand and call it knowledge. Brandon's hand found the knife. Where is she? The real Emily? Gone. Consumed. I needed her shape, her voice, her memories. The consumption is total. The thing took a step into the pool, water rippling around ankles that bent wrong. But you interest me more, Brandon Walsh. The one who survived fire. The one who carries dead men in his head. I can smell trauma on you like smoke. Would you like to see them again? Your crew? I can wear their faces. Can speak with their voices. Can show you exactly what they looked like when the flames took them. Brandon's vision grayed at the edges. Flashback imminent. He recognized the symptoms. Tunnel vision, time dilation, the sensation of heat on skin that wasn't really there. He bit the inside of his cheek hard enough to taste copper, using pain to anchor himself to present reality. The Navajo have names for you, he said, voice steady, despite his pulse trying to burst through his chest wall. Skinwalker, Yi Nald Lushi, witch who walks on 4 legs. The thing tilted Emily's head too far, vertebrae popping. The Dine fear us for good reason. We violated their most sacred taboos to gain this power. Killed family members, wore their skin, learned to walk in any form we choose. Your park is built on our hunting ground, Brandon Walsh. This canyon belonged to us, long before your people carved names into stone and called it conservation. It moved closer. Brandon stepped back, but the pool was deep here, the current stronger, his boots finding no purchase on slick stone. I can wear the fire for you, it whispered with Emily's voice. Can show you how Danny looked with his skin melting, how Michael screamed, how the third one, what was his name, Brandon? The name you can't say? Johnson, Brandon forced out. His name was Johnson. Johnson. The thing savored the name, tongue moving behind Emily's teeth in ways human tongues didn't. I can be Johnson. Can let you save him this time. Would you like that? Would you like to rewrite your failure? The thing's form rippled. Emily's face remained, but the body beneath began shifting. Bones reorganizing with sounds like green wood breaking, skin stretching over a frame that was growing, changing, becoming something else. Brandon ran. Not a decision. Pure animal response. He splashed through the pool, lost his footing, went under briefly into water so cold it stopped his breath, surfaced gasping and scrambled for the far shore, for the narrow continuation of the canyon where the walls closed in tight enough that something large couldn't follow easily. Behind him, the thing laughed. A chorus of voices now, Emily and others, male voices, children's voices, an elderly woman's voice, all speaking in terrible harmony. Run, Brandon Walsh. We enjoy the hunt. The fear seasons the meat. The canyon became a nightmare of narrow passages and waist-deep pools, of places where Brandon had to swim with his pack held overhead, of sections where the walls closed in so tight he could touch both sides with elbows extended. The thing followed. He could hear it moving, sometimes splashing through water, sometimes the scrape of claws on stone, sometimes the slap of bare human feet, and voices, always voices. Danny's voice from 2 years ago. Brandon, help me, the fire jumped the line, where are you? Michael's. I can't breathe, the smoke, please. Johnson. Why did you leave us? Why did you run? His sister's voice, though his sister was alive in Phoenix. I'm ashamed of you, Brandon. You let them die. His mother. My cowardly son. My failure. Emily Watson. You could have saved me if you'd been braver. Brandon's lungs burned. His legs were lead. The canyon walls seemed to pulse, seemed to lean inward with each breath. The sandstone becoming organic, becoming throat, becoming the gullet of something vast swallowing him whole. He burst into a wider section and stopped, gasping. Dead end. Sheer wall rising 200 feet, no handholds, no way forward. The creek flowed from a slot near the top, water falling in a thin stream that evaporated before reaching the pool below. Trapped. The thing appeared at the far end of the chamber, but it wasn't wearing Emily anymore. It had chosen Johnson's form. Perfect recreation, down to the scar on his left forearm from a childhood accident, down to the way he stood with weight on his right leg because of an old knee injury. Johnson's face smiled at Brandon with Johnson's familiar crooked grin. "End of the line, Walsh," it said with Johnson's voice, Johnson's accent, Johnson's habit of dropping consonants when tired. "Just like before, nowhere left to run. Except last time you ran while we burned. This time I think you stay." The thing began to change again. Johnson's face melted, reformed, became something that was part human and part coyote, and part something older, something that predated both species. It dropped to 4 legs, then stood on 2, then seemed to exist in both states simultaneously. Quantum superposition of predator forms. Brandon's back hit the canyon wall. No escape. No way out. Just like the fire. Just like watching the flames close in while his crew screamed for help he couldn't give. His hand found the inReach satellite communicator. Useless for calling help. Rescue would take hours he didn't have. But it had one other function. He activated the SOS beacon. The thing laughed. "Who will save you, Brandon Walsh? Your God? Your Rangers? By the time they arrive, I'll be wearing you. We'll walk out of this canyon with your face. We'll go to your home. We'll live your life. I've done it before. Easier than you'd think. Humans see what they expect to see." Brandon's thumb found the GoPro controls on his chest rig. He activated record. "My name is Brandon Walsh," he said clearly. "I'm in Orderville Canyon, Zion National Park. If you find this footage, know that the Navajo legends are real. Skinwalkers exist. They can take any form. Trust no one who comes out of this canyon, even if they look like me, even if they have my memories, especially then." The thing tilted its head. Too far again, always too far. Brave words, but footage can be explained away. Hallucination, heat stroke, psychological break from PTSD. Your people are very good at denial. It lunged. Brandon threw himself sideways into the pool, diving deep. The water's cold, shocking his system into crystal clarity. He opened his eyes underwater and saw the thing above him. Saw it had followed him in. Saw its form rippling between states. Human limbs becoming animal, becoming something else entirely. And he saw something else. In the deepest part of the pool, where the water was darkest, a crevice in the rock. Small, maybe too small, but maybe not. His lungs were screaming for air. The thing was diving toward him, moving with horrible grace, its mouth open and filled with too many teeth arranged in wrong configurations. Brandon kicked hard, pulling himself down toward the crevice. His pack snagged on stone. He shrugged out of it, left it floating, and squeezed into the gap with strength born of pure terror. The space was tight enough that his chest couldn't fully expand. He wiggled forward in absolute darkness, rock scraping skin through his shirt, the passage becoming smaller. For a moment he was certain he was stuck, that he would die here wedged in stone, drowning as his air ran out. Then his hand found open space. He pulled himself forward and emerged, gasping, in an underwater cavern, some pocket of air trapped in the rock. He surfaced in darkness so complete it had texture, and breathed air that tasted of minerals and time. Behind him from the passage came the sound of something too large trying to force itself through a space too small. The scrape of claws on stone, a sound that might have been frustration or might have been laughter. Then silence. Brandon floated in the dark, his body shaking with cold and adrenaline crash, and tried to orient himself. The cavern was small. He could touch the ceiling with his hand, could swim from one wall to another in 4 strokes. But there had to be another way out. Water was flowing in from somewhere, which meant it was flowing out somewhere else. He activated his iPhone's flashlight. The beam cut through darkness, reflected off mineral-rich water, illuminated walls covered in formations that looked almost deliberate. And there, on the far wall, a passage leading up. Brandon swam toward it, his muscles cramping from cold. The passage was dry, ascending at a steep angle, narrow enough that he had to crawl. His phone's light showed scratch marks in the stone, old marks, many of them. made by claws that were sometimes animal, sometimes human, sometimes both. This was a hunting ground. How many people had the skinwalker chased into this canyon over the years? How many had found this same escape route, only to discover it led somewhere worse? The passage opened into a chamber, and Brandon's light found bones. Human bones. A lot of them. Arranged in patterns that suggested ritual, or maybe just the careful collecting of a predator who kept trophies. Skulls with elongated jaws. Rib cages that had been broken and reset in wrong configurations. Femurs that showed evidence of gnawing. Not animal gnawing, but the distinctive marks of human teeth. And in the center of the bone chamber, a figure. Not the skinwalker. Human. Female. Wearing the tattered remains of a Zion National Park Ranger uniform. Her name tag was still visible. E. Watson. Emily's eyes opened. "Brandon," she whispered, her voice raw. "You found me. Oh God, you actually found me." Brandon approached slowly, his mind cataloging injuries. Severe dehydration, signs of shock, left ankle grotesquely swollen, lacerations on arms and legs, but alive, definitely alive, her chest moving with shallow breaths. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "I don't know. It took me yesterday. Chased me into the canyon, into the pool, through the passage. I thought I was escaping, but I ended up here. It comes sometimes, wears different faces, talks with them. It's been trying to learn me, studies how I move, how I speak. I think," her voice cracked, "I think it's going to replace me, wear me, and go back to the visitor center, and no one will know." Brandon knelt beside her, checking her pulse. Rapid, but steady. She was in bad shape, but stable enough for the moment. "I activated my emergency beacon," he said. "Rescue will come." Emily laughed, brittle. "Rescue? You think they'll find us? You think that thing will let them?" She grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "It showed me things, Brandon. Memories. It's old. Older than the park, older than European contact. The Navajo knew to avoid this canyon. They left warnings. But we built trails anyway, brought tourists, acted like we owned the land." "The Navajo," Brandon said slowly. "Do they have ways to fight it? To kill it?" "I don't know. Maybe. But you'd need weapons we don't have. Silver. Specific ceremonies, knowledge we've lost or never had." Emily's grip tightened. "It told me it's patient. Said it can wait decades between hunts. Said it enjoys the fear more than the flesh." A sound echoed from the passage Brandon had crawled through. Scraping. Something moving in the tunnel. "It knows you're here," Emily whispered. "It's been waiting. This is its den, Brandon. This is where it brings everything it catches." The scraping grew louder. Brandon stood, putting himself between Emily and the passage entrance. His knife felt pathetically inadequate. What could steel do against something that reformed its body at will? The thing emerged, but it wasn't wearing animal form now. It had chosen human. Specifically, it had chosen Brandon. His own face looked at him from across the bone chamber. His own body moved with his mannerisms. His own voice spoke. "Interesting choice, Brandon Walsh. Most run. You stayed to protect the girl. The fire didn't burn that out of you after all." Brandon stared at himself, at the perfect recreation down to the small scar over his left eyebrow, down to the way he stood with slightly more weight on his right foot from an old hiking injury. "Let her go," Brandon said. "You want to wear someone, wear me. I'm already broken. She's got her whole life ahead of her." His double smiled. "Noble. Futile, but noble. I don't need permission, Brandon Walsh. I take what I want. But I am curious. What do you think happens when I consume you? Do your memories become mine? Do I dream your dreams? Do I carry your dead friends in my head?" "I don't know," Brandon said honestly. "Neither do I. That's why it's interesting." The double moved closer, and Brandon could see small imperfections now. The way its breathing was slightly off rhythm, the way it blinked too infrequently, the way its shadow fell at wrong angles to the light source. "Let me offer you truth," it said with his voice. "I cannot be killed by your weapons, cannot be trapped by your tools. This canyon is mine, has been mine for longer than your species has had written language. The DNA knew to offer respect, to leave gifts, to avoid sacred spaces. Your people put up signs and call it conservation. Then what do you want? Brandon asked. If you're going to kill us anyway, what's the point of talking? His double considered. I want you to understand. To know that you die not because you were unlucky, not because you made wrong choices, but because you are human and this is my territory, and that is the natural order. The deer doesn't negotiate with the wolf. The mouse doesn't bargain with the hawk. You are prey, Brandon Walsh. Accept it. Behind Brandon, Emily made a small sound. Pain or fear or both. He thought about his crew, about Danny and Michaels and Johnson burning while he ran. Thought about carrying that guilt for 2 years, about the nightmares, about the way he couldn't look at fire without his pulse spiking. Thought about the therapist saying, "You survived because you made the right choice in an impossible situation." No, Brandon said quietly. The double tilted its head. No, I'm not accepting it. I'm not prey. I'm a human being with tools and knowledge and the capacity to learn, and I know something you don't. Oh? The thing sounded amused. What secret knowledge do you possess, Broken Ranger? Brandon pulled out his iPhone. The screen showed 23% battery. Enough. He'd been recording since entering the bone chamber. Video evidence of everything. Of the skinwalker wearing his face. Of Emily alive. Of the bones. All uploading in chunks whenever his phone caught satellite signal through gaps in the rock above. I know you're not as patient as you claim, Brandon said. If you were, you wouldn't be here. You'd wait for rescue, kill them too, wear their faces. But you're here now because you're hungry. Because I activated a beacon and help is coming and you have a limited window. The double's smile faded. I know you can't hold form forever, Brandon continued, voice steady despite his racing heart. The Navajo legends say skinwalkers must return to human form to sleep. Say they're vulnerable during the change. Say they hoard the skins they've stolen because they need them to transform. He gestured at the bones. These aren't trophies, they're ingredients. You need human remains to maintain the ability. Which means this chamber is important to you. Which means you won't want it destroyed. Brandon pulled out the emergency flare from his pocket. Standard issue for rangers. Meant to signal rescuers or start emergency fires. Magnesium core. Burns at 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to ignite bone dust, dry tissue, the organic materials the skinwalker needed. You wouldn't, the double said, and for the first time its voice carried something like uncertainty. I survived fire once by running, Brandon said. Lost everything I cared about because I chose my life over theirs. Not this time. This time I burn it all and take you with me if I have to. He struck the flare. It ignited with a brilliant white light that filled the chamber, that made the bones cast twisted shadows, that revealed the skinwalker's true face beneath the stolen one, something ancient and hungry and wrong. The thing screamed, not with Brandon's voice now, but with a chorus of every voice it had ever stolen, every person it had consumed, all speaking in agonized harmony. It lunged, but Brandon was already moving, dropping the flare into the bone pile, grabbing Emily, dragging her toward the passage even as the chamber filled with smoke and heat. The bones caught fast. Dried tissue ignited. The walls themselves seemed to burn. Mineral deposits combusting, ancient organic materials that had accumulated for centuries turning to flame. The skinwalker thrashed in the inferno, its form rippling between shapes, unable to settle on any one form as the materials it needed to maintain cohesion burned away. Brandon pulled Emily into the passage, the heat pursuing them, the smoke filling the tunnel. He knew this smoke, had known it 2 years ago, had breathed it while his crew died. His body wanted to shut down, wanted to curl into fetal position and wait for unconsciousness. But Emily's hand was in his and she was alive, and this time he could save someone. They emerged into the underwater cavern. Brandon took the deepest breath his scorched lungs could manage, pulled Emily under, and swam for the crevice. Squeezed through with her, the passage scraping them both. Emily's broken ankle banging against stone as she bit back screams. They surfaced in the main pool to find the canyon filled with late afternoon light, and the sound of helicopters overhead. The in-reach beacon had worked. Rescue had arrived. Brandon floated on his back, keeping Emily's head above water, and watched the helicopter descend. Behind them, smoke poured from cracks in the canyon wall, black and oily, smelling of burnt hair and older things. The rescue team pulled them out, asked questions Brandon couldn't answer yet, stabilized Emily's ankle, wrapped them both in thermal blankets despite the July heat. The lead ranger, a woman named Chen, looked at the smoke, at Brandon's expression, at the way his hands weren't shaking despite everything. "What happened down there?" she asked. Brandon thought about the truth, about skinwalkers and stolen faces and bone chambers, about the way the thing had worn his crew's voices like weapons, about how he'd finally made a choice that didn't end with him surviving alone. "Wildlife encounter," he said. "Trapped in a cave system, started a fire to signal for help. Watson needs immediate medical attention." Chen studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You did good, Walsh. You brought her home." In the helicopter, Emily squeezed his hand. "Thank you," she mouthed over the rotor noise. Brandon nodded but didn't speak. His throat was raw from smoke. His body was a catalog of injuries. His mind was already filing everything that had happened into the same dark space where he kept the fire, where Danny and Michaels and Johnson lived in permanent loop. But Emily was alive. That was different. That was new. The helicopter banked over Zion Canyon, the evening light painting the sandstone in shades of red and gold. Beautiful. Deadly. Ancient. The land remembered what humans forgot, remembered when it belonged to things that wore faces like masks and hunted in the spaces between what was known and what was feared. 3 days later, sitting in his ranger housing, Brandon uploaded the footage from his iPhone to a private cloud account. Video of the skinwalker, of the bone chamber, of everything. Insurance, maybe. Or evidence for whoever came next. Emily had been airlifted to a hospital in St. George was recovering well, had told doctors she remembered nothing after falling and hitting her head. Smart. Safer. Brandon had visited once, had seen the way her hands shook when she thought no one was looking, had recognized the beginning of the same road he'd walked for 2 years. He'd left her his therapist's contact information. His supervisor had recommended counseling after the traumatic rescue event. Brandon had agreed, scheduled an appointment, knew he'd probably actually go. The fire had taught him that running from trauma just meant it caught up eventually in worse ways. But tonight, he sat on his porch and watched the sun set over Zion Canyon and thought about the Navajo warnings, about how his people had built trails through sacred spaces and called it progress. Thought about the smoke still rising from cracks in Orderville Canyon, about whether the skinwalker had truly died or merely retreated to somewhere deeper, waiting. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Thank you for not telling them the truth. They wouldn't have believed it anyway. E." Brandon typed a response. "You going to be okay?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Are you?" He thought about that, about Danny and Michaels and Johnson, about the way guilt had eaten him alive for 2 years. About how he'd finally made a choice that saved someone instead of just keeping himself alive. "Getting there," he typed. "Me too." Brandon set his phone down and watched the stars emerge, pinpricks of light in darkening sky. Tomorrow he'd go back to work, would guide tourists through the Narrows, would warn them about flash floods and heat exhaustion and staying on marked trails, would not mention the deeper dangers, the ones that didn't appear in Park Service brochures, the ones that existed in the spaces where land remembered and legends breathed. But tonight he sat in the cooling desert air and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like maybe he'd earned the right to survive. Not because he'd run fast enough, not because he'd been lucky, but because when it mattered, when someone else's life was on the line, he'd made the choice to stay and fight. The nightmares would still come. He knew that. Fire and smoke and screaming and guilt. But maybe, mixed in with them now, there'd be other dreams. Emily alive. The helicopter rising. The moment of choosing to burn it all rather than run again. Maybe that wasn't redemption, but it was a start. In the distance, a coyote called. Just a coyote, normal wildlife. Nothing supernatural. Probably. Brandon listened to it echo off canyon walls and smiled slightly, dark humor finding him. He'd never be certain again. Never walk through wilderness without wondering what else was watching. Never fully trust the boundary between natural and supernatural. But that was okay. That was honest. That was living with eyes open instead of pretending the world was smaller and safer than it really was. Brandon Walsh, survivor of fire and survivor of things worse than fire, sat on his porch and waited for whatever came next, knowing he wouldn't run from it. Not anymore. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Your interpretation about Emily's fate? Tyler Martin found the teeth first, human molars arranged in a perfect circle around Ryan Turner's abandoned tent, each one cracked lengthwise as if something had tried to extract marrow from bone that contained none. The November wind carried sounds that weren't wind, syllables in a language Tyler didn't speak but somehow understood meant hungry, always hungry, never full. His satellite phone showed 4 bars, but when he pressed dial his wife's number, the connection opened onto breathing that came from 45 miles of frozen wilderness and something much older than the mountains. He'd kissed Sarah that morning before the flight to Wyoming. She'd been sleeping, bald head against the pillow, skin pale from the latest round of chemo. The girls, Emma and Lily, 9 and 6, had been at school. Tyler had left a note on the kitchen counter next to the stack of medical bills that never seemed to shrink no matter how many extra shifts he pulled. Back in 72 hours. Love you all. We'll get through this. Ranger salary wasn't enough. Would never be enough. Not with stage 3 lymphoma treatment running $20,000 a month even with insurance. But it was the only thing Tyler knew how to do. The only marketable skill from a decade with the National Park Service. So he'd taken the emergency deployment to Yellowstone when the request came through. Double overtime for wilderness recovery during off-season. Hazard pay for November conditions in the Lamar Valley backcountry. 3 days' work that would cover Emma's upcoming birthday and maybe one more round of Sarah's treatment. The helicopter had dropped him at dawn, pilot shouting over rotor wash about the incoming storm system. 72 hours max before weather made extraction impossible. Tyler had his Garmin Oregon 600 loaded with waypoints, VHF radio programmed to park frequencies, and enough cold weather gear to survive a week if necessary. Standard wilderness SR deployment, except for the detail that made his gut clench. Ryan Turner was the 7th person to disappear from this drainage in 3 years. All in November. All found weeks later, partially consumed. All with the same expression frozen on what remained of their faces. The tent stood in a clearing beside Soda Butte Creek, fabric intact but covered in scratches that ran parallel, 4 marks at a time, like massive claws had tested the nylon without actually tearing through. Tyler photographed everything with his iPhone 5s. The teeth arrangement, the scratch patterns. The frozen ground churned as if something had paced circles around the tent for hours. Ryan Turner's backpack hung from the bare pole, food cache undisturbed, which ruled out grizzly activity. Wrong season anyway. Bears were denning, had been for weeks. The Garmin showed Ryan's last GPS ping 3 days ago, right here at this campsite. After that, nothing. No emergency beacon activation, no radio calls, no movement. 26 years old, experienced backcountry guide, solo permit for a week-long wildlife photography expedition. He'd checked in with dispatch every 12 hours like clockwork until November 9th at 1800 hours. Then silence. Tyler keyed his radio. Base, this is Martin. Located Turner's campsite at coordinates transmitted evidence of unusual activity. Need you to run search history on this drainage, any prior incidents. Static answered. He tried again, adjusted frequency, checked battery. The radio worked fine mechanically, but no signal penetrated, as if the mountains had suddenly learned to absorb VHF transmission. His satellite phone showed full bars. But every call attempt ended in that same breathing, rhythmic and patient, and absolutely wrong. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in the past hour. Tyler's thermometer read -8 Fahrenheit with the sun still visible above the ridgeline. By nightfall, it would hit -20, maybe colder if the storm front arrived early. He had maybe 6 hours to find Ryan Turner or evidence of what happened. Then he'd need to make camp, ride out the weather, extract at first light when the helicopter could fly again. His breath crystallized instantly in air that smelled like winter, and something underneath winter. Something that made his hindbrain scream warnings his conscious mind couldn't quite interpret. Decay, maybe, or the particular scent of predator musk concentrated beyond natural possibility. Tyler found the trail north of camp. Not Ryan's footprints. Tyler had memorized the tread pattern from photos in the missing person file. These were barefoot impressions in frozen mud, human-sized but wrong, toes elongated, pressure distribution suggesting something that walked upright but hadn't always. The tracks led into old-growth forest where spruce trees grew dense enough to block most daylight. He should have waited for backup. Protocol said don't pursue alone, especially not with weather deteriorating and communication down. But the overtime money was already spent in his mind, allocated to bills that wouldn't wait, to treatment schedules that couldn't be delayed. Sarah needed him home in 72 hours with confirmation of work completed, payment authorized, family kept afloat for another month. The forest swallowed him after 20 yards. That was the only way Tyler could describe it. Not entering woods, but being consumed by them. Temperature dropping another 10 degrees. Sound dampening to absolute silence except for his breathing and footsteps. The tracks continued, occasionally disappearing where frozen ground gave way to exposed bedrock, reappearing in patches of snow that shouldn't exist at this elevation in early November. He'd gone maybe half a mile when the vision hit. No warning. One moment Tyler was following tracks through spruce forest, the next he was somewhere else. Someone else watching through eyes that weren't his own. A woman, Native American, dressed in clothing from a century ago, knelt beside a fire that had burned down to coals. She was speaking in a language Tyler didn't know but understood anyway, words that meant, "Please, I'm so hungry. There's nothing left. The others are already gone. Just let me. Just this once. The children are starving." Her hands held something that had been human. She was weeping. She was eating. Tyler snapped back to present with such force he stumbled, caught himself against a tree trunk that felt warm despite sub-zero temperatures. His heart hammered against ribs that suddenly felt too tight, too constraining. Nausea rolled through him in waves. Hallucination. Altitude sickness, maybe, though he'd done plenty of deployments at higher elevations. Or early hypothermia affecting cognition, except his core temperature was fine, gear functioning perfectly. The vision had felt absolutely real. Not dream logic, but experienced memory. Someone else's memory bleeding into his consciousness. The tracks led to a cave. Not natural formation, but something carved into the hillside. Entrance maybe 6 feet high and 3 wide. Walls showing tool marks from implements that predated modern equipment. Tyler's headlamp illuminated symbols scratched into the stone. Geometric patterns and pictographs that might have been indigenous art, or might have been warnings. He photographed them, sent the images to his phone's storage, knowing they wouldn't transmit but needing documentation anyway. Ryan Turner's camera lay just inside the entrance, Canon 5D Mark III, lens cracked, memory card missing. Beside it, more teeth. These still attached to a partial jawbone that forensics would later identify as belonging to someone who'd disappeared in 2012. Tyler's radio crackled to life. Not dispatch. That breathing again. Close enough now that he could hear the wet quality. The suggestion of fluid in lungs that shouldn't contain fluid. And underneath, almost subliminal, words in that language the vision woman had spoken. Wittigo. Windigo. Wendigo. He knew the word. Every ranger who'd worked territories with Algonquian history knew the legends. Spirit of insatiable hunger, possessing those who violated the cannibalism taboo, transforming them into monsters with endless appetite. Folklore, cautionary tales to prevent survival cannibalism during harsh winters. Not real. Except Tyler was standing in a cave filled with human remains, temperature dropping toward levels that would kill him within hours, communications cutting through to something that breathed with the rhythm of hibernating mountains. His satellite phone rang. Actual ring, Sarah's custom tone. Tyler grabbed it, desperate for normal, for connection to the world where cancer was the worst thing threatening his family. Tyler? Not Sarah's voice. Something approximating Sarah's voice through a throat that had forgotten how to form human sounds. When are you coming home? The girls miss you. I miss you. It's so cold here. So hungry. He dropped the phone. It kept ringing as it bounced off stone, Sarah's ringtone echoing in the cave, that wrong voice saying, I love you, I'm so hungry, I love you. Until the battery died, or Tyler's sanity broke enough that he stopped hearing it. Another vision slammed into him, different perspective this time. He was the thing speaking, was inside the cave darkness looking out at a ranger who'd made the mistake of coming alone, tasting his fear scent on the air, counting the hours until hunger would drive him to decisions that couldn't be unmade. The ranger had family. Good. Family meant motivation. Meant he'd compromise survival protocol if it meant getting home to them. Meant he'd make poor choices when the cold bit deep enough and the food ran out, and the storm pinned him in place with nothing but desperation and protein that used to be human. Tyler staggered out of the cave, vision clearing, finding himself on hands and knees in snow that had started falling. Heavy flakes, the kind that meant the storm had arrived early, that meant the helicopter wouldn't fly for days instead of hours. His Garmin showed 1847 hours, almost dark, temperature still dropping. He needed shelter, needed fire, needed to survive the night and reassess in morning light. Ryan Turner's tent was still standing. Tyler made it back by following his own tracks, fighting wind that had picked up to 30 knots, visibility dropping to near zero in the blowing snow. The tent's interior showed no signs of struggle, just personal effects neatly arranged and a journal lying open to the last entry. Tyler read by headlamp. November 9th, 1800 hours. Something in the woods. Tracks around camp all night. Can hear it breathing. Tried to leave this morning but got turned around, ended up back here after 6 hours walking north. GPS shows I should be 10 miles away. Called dispatch. Line connected to something that knew my mother's voice. She's been dead 4 years. It spoke to me in her voice, said she was so cold, so hungry, wouldn't I help her, wouldn't I come to the cave where she's waiting? I'm not crazy. I know she's dead. But the voice was perfect. Every inflection. The pet name she used when I was little. How could it know? Going to try again at first light. If anyone finds this, don't follow the tracks. Don't listen to the voices. It's not what you think it is. The entry ended there. Tyler's hands shook, turning pages forward, finding nothing but blank paper after November 9th. He should sleep, should conserve energy for the push out at dawn, storm or no storm. But every time he closed his eyes, the visions returned. 100 years of November hunger, of people making terrible choices when starvation left no alternatives, of a spirit that fed on violation and grew stronger with each soul consumed. The Wendigo wasn't a single entity, but a contagion, a supernatural infection that spread through the act of survival cannibalism and transformed victims into vectors. And it was hungry, always hungry, never full. Tyler forced himself to eat, freeze-dried beef stroganoff rehydrated with melted snow, calories his body desperately needed. The food tasted like ashes in desperation. He kept seeing the vision woman's face, her tears, her hands holding meat that had been a person she'd loved. Understanding bloomed like frostbite. The Wendigo didn't just possess cannibals, it created them. Drove them to it through starvation, through isolation, through wearing down resistance until even the unthinkable became survival. His phone had died. The radio was worse than useless. The Garmin still tracked position, but weather made extraction impossible. Tyler was alone in a tent surrounded by teeth, 45 miles from rescue, with something circling in the dark that spoke in the voices of the people he loved most. The storm intensified. Wind threatened to rip the tent from its stakes, snow accumulating so fast that Tyler had to dig out the vestibule every hour to prevent entombment. Temperature inside the tent, even with his body heat and sleeping bag rated to -20, hovered around 0. Outside, -30 and dropping. Sarah's voice came through the wind. "Tyler, I'm scared. The cancer came back. It's in my brain now. I can feel it eating me. Please come home. Please, I'm so cold." His daughter's voices. "Daddy, where are you? Mommy won't wake up. We're hungry. Why did you leave us?" Tyler buried his head in his sleeping bag, reciting medical facts to drown out the sounds. Stage 3, lymphoma 5-year survival rate with treatment, 63%. Without treatment, approaching 0. Monthly chemotherapy cost $18,000 to $22,000. His annual salary $47,000. The math didn't work, had never worked. He'd taken this deployment knowing it wouldn't be enough, but unable to stop trying anyway. The vision that came next was worse because it was real. His own future, hours from now. Hypothermia setting in as the storm raged, food running low, desperation mounting. The cave would seem reasonable then. Shelter from the wind, maybe deeper chambers that held warmth. And in that cave, the remains, protein, calories, survival. He could see himself making the choice. See the exact moment when staying alive for his family overrode every other consideration. See his hands reaching for meat that used to be Ryan Turner, rationalizing it as just tissue, already dead, no different from the beef in his pack except for the label. See the transformation beginning the moment he swallowed. Tyler screamed into his sleeping bag, hands clawing at his face hard enough to draw blood. The Wendigo didn't need to force him. It just needed to wait. Let the cold and hunger and desperation do the work. He was already compromised, already making cost-benefit calculations about the unthinkable. Dawn came eventually. The storm had passed, leaving 4 feet of new snow and a temperature of -42 Fahrenheit. Tyler's water bottles had frozen solid despite being in his sleeping bag. His spare batteries were dead. The satellite phone was a brick of circuitry and ice. He had maybe 12 hours before hypothermia became irreversible, maybe less if he couldn't generate heat through movement. The tracks from yesterday had been buried. New ones circled the tent, barefoot impressions in snow that should have killed any living thing through contact freezing. They led toward the cave. Tyler followed them. Not because he wanted to, because the alternative was freezing to death in a tent while his family lost their house, their insurance, their chance at survival. The overtime payment for this deployment would cover 1 month's treatment. 1 month, Sarah needed to stay alive. He'd endure anything for that month. The cave entrance was clear of snow. Impossible given the accumulation everywhere else. But there it was. Swept clean, almost inviting. Tyler's remaining rational mind screamed warnings his body ignored. Legs carrying him forward, hands reaching into the darkness. Inside, warmth, actual heat, emanating from deeper in the cave system, enough to melt the ice crusted on his gloves. And the smell, rot and copper and something underneath that triggered salivation despite his horror. Meat. Fresh meat. Calories his body desperately craved. Ryan Turner's corpse lay arranged almost ceremonially in the cave's central chamber, not decomposing. Preserved by cold and something else. Flesh still pink, still suggesting food rather than person. Beside it, the remains of 6 others, each positioned with care, each showing signs of partial consumption before being carefully set aside for later. Tyler's vision narrowed to a tunnel focused on protein, on survival, on getting home to his family. The Wendigo didn't need to possess him anymore. Hunger did the work. Hunger and love and desperation and the terrible mathematics of choosing between morality and the people who needed him alive. His knife came out. Benchmade Griptilian, drop-point blade, sharp enough for field dressing. His hands moved without conscious direction, selecting the muscle group with highest caloric density, rationalizing it as just meat, just tissue, just survival. The first cut released a smell that was all wrong. Not decay, but something alive, something aware. Tyler's hand froze, blade pressed against Ryan Turner's thigh, mind fracturing between hunger and horror. Another vision. Emma and Lily finding him 3 months from now, transformed into the thing that stalked these woods, still wearing his face but wrong inside, speaking in Daddy's voice while hunger consumed every human thought. watching them run, chasing them, unable to stop himself because the Wendigo was endless appetite and there was no family, no love, no Tyler, only hunger that wore his shape and hunted everything he'd tried to protect. He dropped the knife. The cave's warmth vanished instantly, temperature plummeting back to -40 in seconds. Tyler staggered backward, away from the corpses, away from the choice that would have transformed him. His body screamed for calories, for heat, for the protein his survival depended on, his mind held by the thinnest thread to the memory of Emma's laugh, Lily's drawings, Sarah's hand in his during the diagnosis. He ran, out of the cave, into snow that was immediately trying to kill him, storm clouds gathering for round 2. His Garmin showed 45 miles to the nearest road, impossible distance in these conditions. His emergency beacon was in the tent. His radio didn't work. His phone was dead. Tyler activated the beacon anyway, knowing rescue wouldn't come for days, knowing he probably wouldn't survive that long. But survival wasn't the point anymore. The point was dying as himself, rather than becoming something that wore his face while consuming everything he loved. The temperature hit -50 as night fell. Tyler built a snow cave, crude but functional, using techniques from cold weather survival training. His food was gone. His water was ice. His body was shutting down, conserving energy for core functions, extremities already numb. Sarah's voice came through the wind one last time. Not the Wendigo approximation, but actual memory. Sarah on their wedding day saying, "I choose you in sickness and health, as long as we both shall live." Tyler had meant those vows, still meant them. Dying frozen in Wyoming instead of transforming into monster was honoring them, was choosing Sarah and the girls over his own survival, was love expressed through absence rather than presence. He recorded a message on his dead phone, knowing no one would hear it, but needing to say the words anyway. "Sarah, I'm sorry. The money won't come through. This deployment went wrong. But I didn't. I didn't become something that would hurt you. I chose us, even when it meant choosing this. Tell the girls I love them. Tell them Daddy stayed Daddy all the way to the end. I love you. I'm so sorry. I love you." The visions returned as hypothermia set in, consciousness fragmenting. But these weren't Wendigo memories. These were his own. Emma's birth, Lily learning to walk, Sarah's smile before the diagnosis. Every perfect moment that justified his choices, that made dying clean worth more than surviving wrong. Tyler Martin's body was recovered 6 days later when weather cleared enough for aerial search. He'd died in a snow cave 4 miles from Ryan Turner's campsite. Emergency beacon still transmitting, phone clutched in frozen hands. Autopsy showed death by hypothermia and exposure. Stomach contents confirmed he hadn't eaten in over 48 hours, despite obvious signs of extreme starvation. The medical examiner noted one anomaly. Tyler's face held an expression of peace unusual in hypothermia victims. Most showed panic or pain. Tyler looked almost content, like someone who'd won a victory no one else could see. Ryan Turner's remains were found 2 weeks later in the cave, along with 6 other missing persons from previous years. All showed evidence of partial consumption. Forensic analysis suggested animal scavengers, possibly wolverine or opportunistic ravens, though the feeding patterns matched nothing in documented wildlife behavior. The teeth arrangements around campsites were attributed to predator behavioral quirks or hoaxes. The voice phenomena reported by multiple witnesses was explained as pareidolia and psychological stress. The fact that all disappearances occurred in November was noted as interesting, but ultimately coincidental. The case was closed. The Lamar Valley backcountry was reclassified to require buddy system patrols only. The overtime payment Tyler had earned was paid to Sarah Martin's account 3 weeks after his death, covering exactly 1 month of chemotherapy. Sarah survived. The girls grew up. Years later, Emma would sometimes ask about the daddy she barely remembered, the ranger who died in the mountains trying to help someone. Sarah would tell her the truth, that Tyler Martin had been braver than anyone knew, that he'd made impossible choices and somehow chosen correctly. that loving someone sometimes meant protecting them from what you could become. She never told them about the journal found in Tyler's pack, written during his last hours. I can hear it still, calling in your voices, promising warmth, food, survival, everything I need to get back to you. All I have to do is go to the cave. Just once, just to survive. But I've seen what survival costs in this place, seen what I'd become, what I'd bring home with me. So I'm choosing cold instead of hunger, choosing to die as your husband and father rather than live as something wearing my face. I love you, all of you. This is how I show it. By staying away, by ending here, clean. I'm so sorry. I'm so cold. I'm so hungry. But I'm still me, still yours, all the way to the end. The entry ended there. The final page showed only 3 words written over and over in increasingly illegible script as hypothermia set in. Still me. Still me. Still me. And in the Lamar Valley, in November, something still circles the old campsite locations, still leaves teeth arranged in patterns, still speaks in the voices of people you love, telling you how cold they are, how hungry, how much they need you to come to the cave where it's warm and there's food and everything will be okay if you just make one small choice, one tiny compromise, one decision to survive at any cost. It's patient, it's hungry, it's always hungry, and it knows that love makes people desperate. That desperation makes them vulnerable, that eventually, someone will be cold enough, hungry enough, desperate enough to choose survival over self. The Wendigo can wait. It has time. It has November. It has the mountains and the cold and the terrible mathematics of starvation. All it needs is one person to make the choice Tyler Martin refused. Just one. And there are always more Novembers coming. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Jacob Mitchell had put 3 round center mass into the deer before his brain registered what was wrong with it. The animal, a 12-point buck that should have dropped instantly from the Remington 700's 308 hits, didn't flinch. It turned its head toward him with a movement too fluid, too deliberate, and through the scope he saw its eyes. Not the dark, glassy eyes of white-tailed deer. Human eyes. Brown, intelligent, and filled with something that looked disturbingly like amusement. The deer's mouth opened, jaw distending beyond biological possibility, and Madison Foster's voice emerged. "Help me, Jacob. It's wearing me." Then the deer's body collapsed like a discarded coat, and something else stood up from inside it. Mitchell lowered the rifle, his Marine training screaming that this was wrong on every level his nervous system could process. The thing that had been wearing the deer stood on 2 legs now, humanoid but wrong in its proportions. Too tall, limbs too long, joints articulating in directions human anatomy didn't allow. It wore tatters of deerskin like a poorly fitted suit, and beneath those tatters he caught glimpses of something else. Something that might have been human once. "Madison Foster?" he called out, his voice steady despite the cognitive dissonance threatening to fracture his understanding of reality. "Park Ranger Jacob Mitchell. I'm here to bring you home." The thing tilted its head and Madison's voice came again, but layered now, multiple tones speaking simultaneously. "Home is skin. Skin is home. I've found so many homes, Jacob." Then it ran. Not away from him, but parallel to his position, moving through the Great Smoky Mountains underbrush with impossible speed and silence. Within seconds, it had vanished into the fog that perpetually shrouded Cades Cove, leaving Mitchell standing alone with his rifle and the slowly dawning realization that his 3 tours in Afghanistan hadn't prepared him for whatever the hell he'd just witnessed. He keyed his Motorola radio, hands remarkably steady. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Mitchell. I've got a possible sighting of Madison Foster at grid reference 35.5951 north, 83.8422 west. Requesting immediate backup and I need to speak with Superintendent Halsey directly. Priority." Static crackled back at him, Then the voice of Karen Rodriguez, the evening dispatcher. Copy that, Mitchell. What's the nature of the priority? How did he explain this? How did he put into words what he'd just seen without sounding like he'd lost his mind? Jacob Mitchell, Bronze Star recipient, 3 combat deployments, medically retired Marine corporal, didn't hallucinate, didn't panic, didn't see deer stand up on 2 legs and speak with missing hikers' voices. Uncertain, he said finally, but I need that backup, and tell Halsey it involves Foster. He'll understand it's urgent. Roger, backup ETA 30 minutes. Stay on channel 3. Mitchell clipped the radio back to his belt and approached the spot where the deer had collapsed. His Garmin eTrex Vista GPS showed his position clearly. He was approximately 4 miles into the Cades Cove backcountry, in the area where Madison Foster had last been seen 6 days ago. She'd been a day hiker from Knoxville, experienced, well-equipped, the kind of person who didn't just vanish. But the Smokies took people sometimes, swallowed them into the fog and ancient forest, and never gave them back. The Park Service had mounted a full search, grid patterns, K-9 units, aerial reconnaissance. They'd found her day pack on the 3rd day, neatly placed beside the trail like she'd set it down intending to return. Everything inside was untouched. Water, trail mix, first aid kit, her ID. Just no Madison Foster. Mitchell had volunteered for the extended search despite being technically off duty. Something about the case bothered him, though he couldn't articulate what. Now, crouching beside the collapsed deerskin, he understood why his instincts had been screaming. The deer hide lay in an impossible configuration. It wasn't torn or damaged. It had been opened, unzipped from the inside like a costume. The head was intact, eyes still present, but now clearly empty, just organic matter. And on the ground where the thing had stood, he found tracks. They started as deer hoof prints, clear and distinct in the soft earth. Then, mid-stride, they changed, became human footprints, bare feet, adult size, then changed again into something else. Clawed, 3-toed, resembling no animal Mitchell had ever tracked. He photographed everything with his digital Kodak EasyShare, hands moving through the familiar routine of evidence documentation, even as his mind struggled to categorize what he was documenting. His training said, gather data, report facts, let the experts interpret. But what experts specialized in shape-shifting entities that wore animal skins and spoke with stolen voices? The fog thickened around him as the October afternoon faded toward evening. The Great Smoky Mountains earned their name honestly. The Cherokee had called them Shaconage, place of blue smoke, and the mist that rose from the ancient forests created perpetual twilight even at midday. Now, with sunset approaching, visibility was dropping to maybe 20 feet. Mitchell's radio crackled. Mitchell, this is Halsey. Rodriguez said you found Foster. Superintendent William Halsey had been running Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 15 years, a career park ranger who'd started as a seasonal naturalist and worked his way up through pure competence and institutional knowledge. He was also one of the few people Mitchell had told about his reasons for leaving the Marines early, about the IED outside Kandahar that had killed 3 of his squad and left him with tinnitus, minor TBI, and a medical discharge that felt like failure. Not exactly, sir, Mitchell said into the radio. I found evidence, and I witnessed something I can't adequately explain over radio. Backup still inbound? 20 minutes. What kind of evidence? Tracks. Multiple species, sir, transitioning mid-stride. He paused, knowing how insane this would sound. And I saw a deer that moved wrong, spoke with Foster's voice, then changed into something else. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Mitchell thought he'd lost the connection. Then Halsey's voice came back, lower, more serious. What did it look like, Mitchell? The thing the deer became? Humanoid, tall, wearing the deerskin like clothing it was shedding. Why? Sir, do you know something about this? Another pause. Stay where you are. Don't pursue. Don't engage. If you see it again, retreat immediately and maintain radio contact. That's an order. Sir. That's an order, Ranger. I'll explain when backup arrives. Until then, stay put and stay safe. The radio went silent. Mitchell stood in the thickening fog, His Remington held in a low, ready position his Marine instructors would have approved of, and tried to reconcile what was happening with his understanding of how the world worked. In Kandahar, the enemy had been human. Dangerous, fanatical sometimes, but human. They bled when shot, died when hit center mass, followed predictable tactical patterns. You could understand them, anticipate them, defeat them with training and firepower, but he just put 3 .308 rounds into something that didn't bleed, didn't die, and changed its shape like a man changing clothes. The fog shifted, and Mitchell caught movement in his peripheral vision. He spun, rifle coming up to his shoulder, eye finding the scope. Nothing visible, just fog and forest and the gathering darkness. Then he heard Madison Foster's voice close enough that she had to be within 10 feet. "Jacob, please. It hurts. It's inside me. It's been inside me for days. Please make it stop." "Show yourself," Mitchell commanded, scanning through the scope. "Madison, if that's really you, step into the open with your hands visible." "I can't," the voice sobbed. "I don't have hands anymore. It took them. Wore them. Wore me. I'm just what's left inside the skin." Mitchell's finger rested beside the trigger guard, not on the trigger. You didn't put your finger on the trigger until you had a target and the decision to fire, but his pulse hammered in his temples and the tinnitus that usually lived as background noise was screaming now. A high-pitched whine that made thinking difficult. "Where are you?" he asked, still scanning. "Talk to me, Madison. Help me find you." "Everywhere," the voice said, and now it was coming from multiple directions simultaneously. "It spread me out, wore different parts of me in different skins. I'm the fox that watched you this morning, the crow on your cabin roof last night, the black bear that crossed your path yesterday. I'm everywhere and nowhere, and I can't die because I'm already scattered." The tactical part of Mitchell's brain noted that these were all real encounters. He had seen those animals in the past 48 hours. He'd thought nothing of it because wildlife was common in the Smokies. But if something had been watching him, studying him, wearing different forms. "What does it want?" Mitchell asked. "To wear everything," Madison's voice answered. "To know what it's like to be everything. It's been here since before the Cherokee, since before humans named these mountains. It learned skin wearing from the first people who came here, learned their magic and twisted it. Now it collects, wears, experiences, never satisfied. A skinwalker." The word came to Mitchell from somewhere, some half-remembered conversation or documentary. Navajo legend. Witches who wore animal skins to transform, who violated sacred taboos to gain power. But that was Southwest mythology, desert and mesa, not the humid forests of Appalachia. Except the Cherokee had their own shapeshifter legends, didn't they? The Raven Mocker, the Spearfinger. Stories about beings that wore false forms, that consumed humans from the inside out. Every culture had these stories because they were based on something real. The thought crystallized with terrible clarity. All those legends, all those warnings passed down through generations. What if they weren't just stories? What if they were survival information, encoded in narrative because that's how humans remembered important things? "Madison," Mitchell said, "if you can hear me, if any part of you is still in there, how do I stop it?" "You can't," her voice said, closer now. "It's older than stopping, stronger than killing. It doesn't die because it doesn't live, not the way you understand living. It just is, it just wears, it just hunts." The fog parted directly in front of Mitchell and he saw it. Not the deer thing from before. This time it wore the shape of a woman, Madison Foster's shape, naked and perfect and utterly wrong. The skin fit poorly, sagging in places, too tight in others, like a suit tailored for someone slightly different. The face was Madison's face, but the expression was alien, the movement of features not quite matching human facial mechanics. And the eyes. Christ, the eyes were wrong, too wide, pupils contracting and dilating arrhythmically, the color shifting from brown to yellow to black. "Hello, Jacob," it said in Madison's voice. "You look like you'd fit me well." Strong skin. Soldier skin. I haven't worn soldier skin in decades, not since the last war. Mitchell's finger moved to the trigger. You're not Madison Foster. I'm wearing Madison Foster. It corrected, taking a step closer. The movement was gliding, feet not quite touching the ground properly. I've been wearing her since she wandered off the trail to photograph a fox. Such a pretty fox I was. She came close to get the shot, and I came closer to get her skin. Fair trade. Let her go, Mitchell said, knowing it was futile but needing to say it anyway. I can't let go what I've consumed, it said, and smiled with Madison's mouth, but too many teeth. She's digested now. Part of me. I can wear her forever, or I can wear something else. Would you like to see something else? The skin split down the middle like a zipper opening, and something else emerged. Not human, not animal, but a nightmare hybrid. Elongated limbs, too many joints, covered in matted fur and ragged skin patches that didn't match. The Madison suit fell away like discarded clothing, and the thing beneath looked at Mitchell with eyes that belonged to a dozen different creatures. He fired. 3 shots, same as before, center mass on what approximated a torso. The thing staggered backward, more from surprise than damage, and Mitchell saw the bullets pass through it like through smoke, the wounds closing instantly, tissue flowing like liquid. Iron and lead, it hissed in a voice that was no longer Madison's, no longer human. You brought iron and lead to fight spirit. Foolish soldier boy. It came at him fast, impossibly fast, covering 20 feet in a blur of motion. Mitchell's Marine training kicked in. He couldn't retreat fast enough, couldn't reload fast enough, so he used the rifle as a club, swinging the stock in a brutal arc that connected with the thing's skull. The impact felt like hitting water, resistance but no solidity. The rifle passed through the thing's head, and icy cold shot up Mitchell's arms, a sensation like plunging his hands into liquid nitrogen. He stumbled backward, the rifle falling from numb fingers. The thing laughed, the sound like wind through a cave system, hollow and echoing. You can't hurt what doesn't exist the way you exist. I'm the space between skin and self. I'm the wearing, not the worn. A gunshot cracked through the fog, and the thing's head snapped sideways. Not from bullet impact. Mitchell saw the round pass harmlessly through, but from surprise. The thing turned toward the source of the shot, and Mitchell saw 3 Rangers emerging from the fog, Halsey in the lead with a smoking .357 revolver. But Halsey wasn't aiming at the thing anymore. He was aiming at the ground around it, firing into specific points in a pattern that looked almost ritualistic. Each bullet struck a stone, a root, a specific patch of earth, and Mitchell realized Halsey was creating a circle, using the gunshots to mark points. "Mitchell, get inside the circle," Halsey shouted. "Now!" Mitchell scrambled toward Halsey's position, his hands still numb from the contact with the thing. He crossed the invisible line Halsey's bullets had marked, and the temperature immediately changed. Warmer, more stable, less oppressive. The thing tested the boundary, extending one malformed limb toward the circle. Where it crossed the line, the limb began smoking, dissolving like flesh in acid. It pulled back with a shriek that sounded like animals dying. "Iron rounds," Halsey said, reloading his revolver with steady hands. Blessed by a Cherokee medicine woman buried under a new moon, dug up under a full moon. Old magic for old evil. The circle will hold for a few minutes, but we need to move now. The other 2 Rangers, Morrison and Blake, Mitchell recognized them from the main station, had already formed up in a defensive formation, their own weapons out. They moved as a unit, Halsey setting the pace, heading back toward the trail at a fast walk that didn't quite break into a run. "Sir, what the hell is that thing?" Mitchell asked, his voice shakier than he'd like. "Skinwalker," Halsey said. Yanaldlushi in Navajo, though the Cherokee called them Ravenmockers or Kelowna Ialiski. They're not native to this region originally, but one migrated here sometime in the 1700s. We've been managing it ever since. Managing? Mitchell's brain struggled to process this. You knew about this? About it? The Park Service has known since the park was established in 1934, Halsey said. Before that, the Cherokee knew. Before them, whoever lived here knew. It's part of the land now, part of the ecosystem. We keep it fed, keep it contained, and it stays in the deep backcountry away from visitors. Keep it fed? Mitchell's stomach turned. What does that mean? It means, Morrison said quietly, that sometimes people go missing in the Smokies, and sometimes we find them, and sometimes we don't look too hard if they fit certain profiles. Mitchell stopped walking. You're telling me the National Park Service has been feeding people to a skinwalker? Not feeding, Halsey said, also stopping. Just not preventing it from feeding itself. There's a difference. The fuck there is, Mitchell said, his Marine Corps discipline fraying. You let that thing take Madison Foster? You knew she was in danger and you did nothing? We didn't know it had chosen her until too late, Halsey said. The skinwalker is intelligent, selective. It picks people who wander off trail, who ignore warnings, who come alone. We can't predict its choices, only manage the aftermath. Bullshit, Mitchell said. This is criminal. This is conspiracy to commit murder. This is survival, Halsey interrupted, his voice sharp. You want to know what happens when we try to kill it? Ask the Civilian Conservation Corps boys who tried in 1937. We found their bodies scattered across 3 square miles, turned inside out. Ask the Special Forces team the government sent in 1968 when some idiot senator decided this was a national security threat. They went in with flamethrowers and explosives. We found their dog tags hanging from trees, still warm, bodies never recovered. There has to be a way, Mitchell insisted. Everything can be killed. Not this, Blake said. It's not alive the way we understand life. It's spirit given form through will and hunger. You can't kill it any more than you can kill an idea. They'd reached the trail now, the fog thinning slightly in the more open ground. Mitchell could see vehicle lights in the distance, the parking area, civilization, safety, but his mind was still back in that clearing, watching Madison Foster's skin split open like a costume. So what happens now? He asked. We just let it keep hunting? We contain it, Halsey said. We maintain the boundaries, perform the rituals, keep it away from populated areas, and we make sure no one goes looking for it. Like Madison Foster did? Foster wandered into its territory, Halsey said. Once it has someone, once it's consumed them, there's no getting them back. The best we can do is make sure it doesn't spread. They reached the vehicles, 2 Park Service trucks and Halsey's SUV. The superintendent opened his vehicle's rear cargo area and pulled out a worn leather case. Inside were items that looked more at home in an anthropology museum than a ranger's equipment. Bundles of dried herbs, carved stones, what looked like animal bones arranged in specific patterns. The Cherokee taught us the protocols, Halsey explained, seeing Mitchell's expression. How to mark boundaries, how to create safe zones, how to recognize when it's hunting. These mountains are old, Mitchell. Older than America, older than European colonization, older than the tribes that named them. Things live here that don't fit modern categories. We either learn to coexist with them or we abandon the mountains entirely. I can't accept that, Mitchell said. There has to be another way. Then you're welcome to try, Halsey said, but understand, everyone who's tried before you is dead, and the skinwalker is still here. Mitchell looked back at the trail, at the fog-shrouded forest where something ancient wore stolen skins and hunted with impossible patience. His hands had stopped shaking. The numbness from touching the thing was fading, replaced by a determination forged in 3 combat tours and a dozen firefights. Tell me everything you know, he said. Every protocol, every ritual, every piece of folklore. If there's a weakness, I'll find it. Halsey studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring coffee. It's going to be a long briefing. That night, Mitchell couldn't sleep. He lay in his cabin bed, listening to the sounds of the Smokies forest outside his window, and cataloged every noise. The owl that called 3 times. Was that really an owl? The scraping on his roof? Branches or something walking up there? The shadow that passed his window? Deer, or something wearing deerskin? He'd faced enemy combatants, IEDs, mortar attacks. He'd watched friends die. He'd killed people in combat and made peace with that necessity. But all of that was human violence, comprehensible within the framework of war and survival. This was different. This was violation of the fundamental rules he'd believed governed reality. And somewhere in the fog-shrouded backcountry, Madison Foster's voice was still screaming inside a skin suit, digested but not dead, worn but not released. At 400, Mitchell gave up on sleep. He made coffee, pulled out every topology map and trail guide he owned, and began planning. If the Skinwalker had territory, it had boundaries. If it had boundaries, it had patterns. And if it had patterns, it could be predicted. And if it could be predicted, maybe, it could be destroyed. The briefing with Halsey started at 0700 and lasted 4 hours. The superintendent pulled out files that officially didn't exist. Incident reports dating back to 1934, handwritten accounts from Cherokee guides, even some records that predated the park's establishment. The first documented encounter was 1887, Halsey said, spreading yellowed papers across his desk. A logging crew working the area reported one of their men took sick with the changing. They tried to get him to a doctor in Gatlinburg, but halfway there he shed his skin and ran into the woods. They found his clothes, still warm, but no body. After that, loggers wouldn't work certain areas. The locals knew to avoid them. Mitchell studied the papers, finding patterns in the accounts. It hunts in cycles, new moon phases, mostly October and April. Why those months? We don't know, Halsey admitted. The Cherokee stories suggest it's linked to seasonal transitions, times when the boundary between physical and spiritual is thinner, but that's speculation. What about weaknesses? Mitchell asked. Every predator has weaknesses. Halsey pulled out another file, this one more recent. Iron affects it, not iron bullets fired through it, but iron placed as boundary markers. The Cherokee used iron spikes driven into specific trees to create containment zones. We've maintained those boundaries, added to them over the years. As long as it stays within the containment area, we can manage it. But it got Madison Foster outside the containment area, Mitchell said. It's been testing the boundaries for years, Halsey said. Getting bolder. We think it's been accumulating power, wearing more skins, gaining strength. The protocols we use were designed for a weaker entity. They might not hold much longer. Mitchell leaned back, processing this. So either the containment fails and it spreads beyond the Smokies, or we find a way to destroy it. Those are the options. There might be a third option, Halsey said carefully. The Cherokee stories mention a ritual, a way to bind the Skinwalker permanently, trap it in a single form so it can't change, can't hunt. But it requires... He hesitated. It requires someone to willingly let it wear them, to invite it in, then bind it from the inside while it's vulnerable during the transformation. A suicide mission, Mitchell said flatly. The stories say the person becomes the prison. They don't die, but they don't live either. They exist in the space between, holding the Skinwalker trapped inside them forever, or until the binding weakens. Has anyone tried this? Once, in 1952, a Cherokee medicine man named William Drowning Bear volunteered. We thought it worked. The Skinwalker disappeared for 20 years. Then in 1972, we found Drowning Bear's remains scattered across 3 counties. Whatever binding he'd created, it eventually failed. Mitchell stood, moved to the window overlooking the Smokies. The morning sun was burning off the fog, revealing the mountains in their October glory, brilliant reds and oranges, the forest aflame with autumn color, beautiful and deadly, like everything else in this place. I'm going to kill it, he said quietly. I don't care what the stories say. I don't care what previous attempts failed. That thing is wearing Madison Foster like a coat, and I'm going to end it. Mitchell, sir, with respect, I didn't survive Kandahar just to accept that some skin-wearing abomination is unkillable. Everything can be destroyed. We just haven't found the right method yet. Halsey sighed. If you're determined to try, I won't stop you. But I also won't authorize official resources for what amounts to a suicide mission. Whatever you do on your own time with your own equipment. Understood, sir. And Mitchell? If you fail, if it takes you, I'll make sure your family knows you died doing your job. They'll never know about this. Mitchell turned from the window. If I fail, make sure they know I tried. Don't let them think I gave up. Over the next week, Mitchell became an expert in folklore he'd never imagined studying. He read everything Halsey provided: Cherokee oral traditions transcribed by anthropologists, Navajo accounts of Yenaldlushi, even some writings by early colonists who'd encountered devil creatures in the Appalachian wilderness. He learned that skinwalkers wore the skins of animals they'd killed, but the animal had to be killed in specific ritualistic ways, that they gained power from taboo violations, cannibalism, incest, murder of family members, that they were former medicine men who'd twisted sacred knowledge into dark purposes. He learned that iron disrupted their transformations, that sage could reveal their true forms, that certain prayers in Cherokee could weaken them temporarily. But nothing he read suggested a permanent solution, a way to truly kill something that existed partially outside physical reality. On the 8th night, Mitchell had a visitor. He was in his cabin studying maps when he heard Madison Foster's voice outside his window. "Jacob, I know you're trying to help me, but you can't." He grabbed his Remington, loaded now with iron rounds he'd had custom made by a gunsmith in Gatlinburg, and moved to the door. "Madison, is any part of you still conscious?" "Pieces," her voice said. "Fragments. It wears me, but I'm still here, scattered. Like being dissolved in water, but still aware of each drop. Jacob, please don't try to kill it. If you fail, you'll just give it your skin too. Then it'll be unstoppable." "I have to try," Mitchell said through the closed door. "I can't just leave you like this." "I'm already gone," Madison said. "What's left isn't worth saving. But you're still whole. Stay that way. Leave the Smokies. Forget about me." "I can't do that." "Silence, then." "I know. That's why it's going to enjoy wearing you. Soldier skin, hero skin, skin that never gave up. It'll wear you for decades, Jacob. Use your strength to hunt, your training to kill. You'll make it so much stronger. Then I'll make sure it never gets the chance to wear me," Mitchell said. "How?" "I'm going to make myself unpalatable," Mitchell said. "I'm going to violate every taboo, break every rule that gives it power. If it gains strength from taboo violation, maybe it loses strength from taboo enforcement. Sacred action instead of desecration." "That's not how it works." "You don't know that," Mitchell interrupted. "Nobody knows. Because nobody's tried sacred warfare against it. Everyone's been fighting defensively, trying to contain it. I'm going to attack." Madison's voice was quiet for a long moment. Then, "There's a cave, 3 miles northeast of Cades Cove, elevation 4,200 feet. The Cherokees sealed it with iron spikes and blessed stones. They said it was the Skinwalker's original den, where it first took form. If you're going to attack it, that's where you'll find its power strongest." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because even scattered and digested, I'm still human enough to want revenge. And because if you somehow succeed, maybe I can finally stop being aware of what it's doing with my skin." The voice faded, and Mitchell was alone again with his maps and his impossible mission. He spent the next 2 days preparing. He visited a Cherokee elder that Halsey quietly recommended, a woman named Sarah Walkingstick who lived outside the park boundaries and practiced traditional medicine. She listened to his plan with an expression that mixed respect and sorrow. "You're going to die," she said simply, "but you're going anyway." "Yes, ma'am." "Then at least die properly." She gave him tobacco, sage, and a small pouch of what she called corpse powder. Ironically, the same substance skinwalkers supposedly used to curse their victims. "The corpse powder will reveal its true form. The sage will cleanse you so it can't track your spiritual scent. The tobacco is for prayer. Offer it to the mountains before you go in. They're older than the skinwalker. Maybe they'll help." "You believe the mountains are alive?" "I believe everything's alive in its own way," Sarah said. "The question is whether it's alive in a way that helps or hurts humans. The skinwalker hurts. The mountains, they just are. But sometimes just are is enough." Mitchell left her home with supplies that would have gotten him laughed out of any military briefing but felt appropriate for the mission he'd undertaken. He'd crossed some threshold, he realized. He'd gone from skeptic to believer, from rational to mythical. The Marines had trained him to adapt to any battlefield. This was just a battlefield he hadn't trained for. He found the cave on the third day of searching. Madison's directions had been precise, and the iron spikes the Cherokee had driven into the rock were still visible. Ancient, rust-covered, but unmistakably present. They formed a pattern around the cave entrance, and even approaching them made Mitchell's skin prickle with static electricity. The cave mouth exhaled cold air that smelled of rot and musk and something else, something that didn't have a name in any language Mitchell knew. He lit the sage, let the smoke waft over him, then scattered tobacco at the cave entrance while whispering the prayer Sarah Walking Stick had taught him. "I honor the mountains that existed before names," he said in Cherokee, stumbling over the pronunciation. "I honor the spirits that guard and the spirits that warn. I ask permission to enter this sacred violation, to cleanse what was corrupted, to end what should not be." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a breeze rose from nowhere, swirling the tobacco smoke, and Mitchell felt something shift in the air pressure, like the mountains themselves were taking a breath. He took it as permission. The cave descended sharply, requiring Mitchell to use his hands for balance as he climbed down into darkness. His flashlight revealed walls covered in scratches, not random but deliberate. Symbols, words and languages he didn't recognize, and images of humans in various poses, all of them seeming to show skin being removed or transferred. This was the Skinwalker's Gallery, he realized, its catalog of every form it had worn across centuries. How many people had disappeared into this cave? How many faces were now just memories trapped in an immortal predator's collection? The cave opened into a larger chamber, and Mitchell's flashlight beam found the center of the room. It was there, waiting for him. Not wearing Madison Foster anymore, wearing something older, something that might have been human once but had been worn and shed and reworn so many times that the original form was lost. It sat cross-legged on a stone, surrounded by animal skins arranged in careful patterns: deer, bear, fox, owl, snake. Each skin empty but positioned as if still containing life. "Soldier boy came to die," it said in a voice like stone grinding on stone. "Brave, foolish, delicious." Mitchell set down his pack, pulled out the Remington loaded with iron rounds, and aimed. "I came to end you. Many have tried, all have failed, all now hang in my collection." It gestured to the walls, and Mitchell saw what he'd missed before. Human skins, preserved and displayed like hunting trophies. Men, women, children, decades or centuries of victims. "You can't kill what doesn't live," the Skinwalker said. "You can't end what has no beginning. I am the space between. I am the wearing. I am—" Mitchell fired. The iron round struck the thing in what approximated a chest, and this time there was an impact. The Skinwalker staggered, and where the bullet hit, flesh began smoking and bubbling like acid was eating it away. "Iron in consecrated cave," Mitchell said, working the bolt and chambering another round. "Blessed by Cherokee medicine, fired by someone who's about to violate every one of your power sources." He reached into his pack and pulled out the corpse powder, scattering it in a circle around himself. The Skinwalker hissed, pulling back, and its form began flickering. Human, animal, something else cycling through stolen shapes. "You want to wear human skin?" Mitchell asked. "Then let me show you what humanity really is." He pulled out a photograph. His squad from Afghanistan, the Marines he'd served with, 3 of whom had died in the IED blast. "These men were my brothers. I loved them, still love them. That's what makes skin valuable, Skinwalker. Not the flesh, but what it contains. Love, loyalty, honor, sacrifice. Things you can't understand because you're just hunger-wearing form." The Skinwalker's flickering intensified. "Meaningless words. Emotions are just chemical reactions. Skin is just skin." "Then why do you need to wear it?" Mitchell fired again, another iron round striking the thing's leg. More smoking, more dissolution. If skin is just skin, why not stay formless? Why the hunger to experience what you kill? "Because I want to live," The skinwalker screamed, and for a moment its form stabilized into something almost human. A Native American man, gaunt and desperate, wearing ragged furs. I was medicine man, I was healer. Then sickness came, took my family, my people. I couldn't heal them, couldn't save them. So I learned other medicine, forbidden medicine. If I couldn't keep them alive, I would wear them forever. Keep them with me. Be them. Mitchell lowered the rifle slightly, understanding dawning. You're not a demon. You're a man who went insane with grief. I'm beyond man now, the skinwalker said, the human form dissolving back into the hybrid nightmare. I've worn thousands. I am thousands. Each skin adds to me, makes me more than what I was. But you're still hungry, Mitchell said. Still empty, because you're not actually experiencing what you wear. You're just imitating it. You can wear Madison Foster's skin, but you can't feel her love for hiking, her passion for photography, her dreams of medical school. You're counterfeit life, skinwalker. You're not alive and you're not dead, you're just stuck. The thing lunged at him faster than before, desperation adding speed. Mitchell fired his remaining rounds as it came, each iron bullet tearing chunks from its shifting form, but it kept coming, and when his rifle clicked empty, it was on him. Cold like before, but worse. This was the cold of absolute zero, of heat death, of entropy made tangible. The skinwalker's hands, claws, appendages closed around Mitchell's throat, and he felt his skin beginning to loosen, to separate, as if the thing was trying to peel him like fruit. I'll wear you forever, soldier boy, it hissed. Wear your strength, your courage, your stubborn refusal to quit. I'll be the hero in your skin. Mitchell's vision was darkening, his lungs screaming for air. With the last of his strength, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the pouch of corpse powder Sarah Walking Stick had given him. He threw it directly into the skinwalker's face, or what approximated a face. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The skinwalker's form began unraveling, cycling through every shape it had ever worn in rapid succession. Deer, fox, bear, dozens of humans, things that might have been human once, things that never were. Each form appeared for a fraction of a second before being replaced, and the thing screaming rose in pitch and volume until it was just noise, just pain, given voice. Mitchell fell to the cave floor, gasping. Through watering eyes, he saw the skinwalker thrashing, its form destabilizing completely. The corpse powder was revealing its true form, or rather, revealing that it had no true form. It was just the act of wearing, just the hunger to experience, given terrible existence through violation of sacred law. And without form, it couldn't hold together. The skins on the walls began smoking, dissolving. The carefully arranged animal pelts in the center of the cave crumbled to ash, and the skinwalker itself, the central core of hunger and grief and desperation that had sustained this thing for centuries, began to collapse inward, folding into itself like a black hole of need. Please, it whispered in 1,000 voices simultaneously. Please don't make me stop. Don't make me be nothing again. I can't go back to nothing. Mitchell pulled himself to his feet, his throat bruised, his skin still feeling loose in places where the thing had tried to separate it. You were nothing the moment you chose hunger over healing. You became nothing when you started wearing stolen lives instead of living your own. Then what am I now? The skinwalker asked, its form now just a vaguely humanoid shadow, barely visible even in the flashlight beam. You're released, Mitchell said. From the hunger, from the wearing, from the need. You're done. The shadow collapsed entirely, and for a moment Mitchell saw it. The original man, the medicine healer who'd loved his family so much that losing them broke his mind and twisted his soul. Just a man, exhausted and grateful, finally allowed to grieve and let go. Then even that faded, and the cave was empty except for Mitchell and ash and the fading smell of sage smoke. He climbed out of the cave as dawn was breaking over the Smokies, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. His radio crackled, Halsey's voice. Mitchell, we lost your signal. Status report? It's done, sir, Mitchell said. The skinwalker is gone. Gone? You mean contained? I mean gone. Destroyed. Whatever it was, it isn't anymore. Silence then. I'm sending a team to your location. Don't move until they arrive. The team arrived 2 hours later. Halsey, Morrison, Blake, and Sarah Walkingstick. They explored the cave, found the ash, the collapsed skins, the symbols on the walls already fading as if the cave itself was forgetting what it had contained. I'll be damned, Halsey said quietly. 300 years of containment failed, and you ended it in one night. Not me, Mitchell said. The skinwalker ended itself. It had been nothing but hunger for so long it forgot it could stop being hungry. I just reminded it. Sarah Walkingstick performed a cleansing ritual in the cave, then recommended it be sealed permanently. This place was sick, she said. Let the mountain reclaim it. They sealed the cave entrance with concrete and iron, then marked it as geologically unstable on park maps. Within a year, vegetation would cover the seal, and within a decade, only a few park rangers would remember what had been stopped here. Mitchell's hands still felt the cold sometimes, phantom sensation of skin trying to separate from muscle. And sometimes, late at night, he heard Madison Foster's voice thanking him for letting her finally rest. He wasn't sure if that was real or just his mind processing trauma, but he chose to believe it was real. Because if he'd learned anything from his encounter with the impossible, it was that the line between real and unreal was thinner than modern skepticism wanted to admit. The mountains were old, the stories were old, and sometimes the old ways were the only ways that worked. 6 months later, Mitchell was promoted to senior ranger and given responsibility for backcountry operations. He'd earned a reputation as someone who could handle impossible situations, though no one outside Halsey's inner circle knew exactly why. He continued to work with Sarah Walkingstick, learning Cherokee traditions and protocols, becoming what the old woman called a bridge person, someone who could walk between the rational world of modern park management and the older world of spirits and sacred spaces, because the skinwalker hadn't been the only impossible thing in the Smokies. It had just been the most dangerous. And someone needed to know how to handle the others when they emerged from the old places, wearing forms that shouldn't exist, following rules that predated human language. Jacob Mitchell, ex-Marine, Bronze Star recipient, survivor of Kandahar and Skinwalker both, had found his new mission. Not ending threats with violence, though he'd do that when necessary, but learning when violence was futile and wisdom was required. He kept Madison Foster's photograph on his desk, a reminder of what he was protecting and why it mattered. And every new moon, he walked the old boundaries, checking the iron spikes and blessed stones, making sure nothing else ancient was testing the barriers between what should exist and what shouldn't. The mountains kept their secrets as they always had, but now at least one of those secrets was gone, released from centuries of hunger into whatever peace awaited things that had forgotten how to be human. And in the fog-shrouded hollows of the Great Smoky Mountains, the deer walked as just deer, the foxes as just foxes, and the shadows were only the absence of light. For now, hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened to Madison. Ava Richardson found Owen Stewart's camp at 2:47 p.m. on September 19, 2022, and knew immediately that something was profoundly wrong because the tent was frozen from the inside. Not frost, actual ice, thick sheets of it coating the nylon walls despite the outside temperature hovering at a reasonable 38 degrees. Owen's sleeping bag lay empty and rigid, frozen in the exact shape of a body that was no longer there. And scattered around the campsite were objects that shouldn't exist. Runic stones arranged in protective circles, a journal written half in English and half in Old Norse, and a Polaroid photograph showing Owen shaking hands with someone whose flesh was the blue-black color of a 3-day-old drowning victim. Ava had been a National Park Service ranger for exactly 43 days. 6 weeks ago, she'd been managing social media campaigns for a tech startup in Seattle, wearing business casual, drinking overpriced lattes, living a life that felt simultaneously comfortable and suffocating. The decision to quit, To apply for ranger positions to radically rebuild her existence had seemed romantic at the time. Back to nature, meaningful work. Escape from corporate meaninglessness. Now standing in the Alaskan wilderness with her breath-forming clouds and her hands shaking inside supposedly cold-weather gloves, Ava felt the full weight of her inexperience settle like lead in her stomach. Her training had covered basic wilderness survival, radio protocols, visitor safety. Nothing had prepared her for a tent frozen from within, for runic stones that looked genuinely ancient, for a photograph that violated every law of decomposition. She pulled out her iPhone, latest model, worthless out here where cell towers were fantasy, and photographed everything anyway. Documentation, evidence, maybe proof she wasn't losing her mind during her first real solo assignment. Owen Stewart had been reported missing 36 hours ago by his research partner at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. 29 years old, graduate student in archaeology and Norse studies, permit approved for 2 weeks of solo research in the Savage River area of Denali. His thesis involved possible Viking exploration of interior Alaska centuries before official records. Fringe theory, his advisor had said dismissively when Ava called for background. Owen was brilliant but obsessive, saw patterns where none existed, believed the sagas contained literal truth about Vinland extending far beyond Newfoundland. Ava picked up the journal, its pages stiff with cold. Owen's handwriting started neat, academic, deteriorating into barely legible scrawl. September 14th. Found it. The burial mound my translation suggested. Stone construction consistent with 11th century Norse technique. Local geology is wrong for these stones. They were transported here, deliberately placed. This is it. This is proof of inland Viking exploration. September 15th. Open the mound. I know the ethics are questionable, but this discovery is too important. Inside preserved body. Male, approximately 6'2", wearing what appears to be Viking-era clothing, armor. Body shows no decay despite obvious age. The cold here, it's not natural. Temperature dropped 40 degrees within the mound. My thermometer stopped working. September 16th. Something wrong. The body isn't dead. Saw it move. Fingers twitching. Chest rising and falling, though no breath visible. This is impossible. Preservation this complete doesn't exist outside permafrost, and this wasn't permafrost. This was active cold. Cold that feels alive somehow. I should leave. I should call this in. But no one will believe me without more evidence. September 17th. It woke up. The entry ended there. The remaining pages were covered in crude drawings, a massive figure with a distended torso, skin the color of week-old bruising, eyes that looked like frozen cataracts, and runes, dozens of them, scratched frantically. Some Ava recognized from her hasty Wikipedia research during the flight to Alaska. Protective symbols, warding signs, prayers to gods she'd thought were mythology. At the bottom of the last page, in handwriting that didn't look like Owen's, in what might have been blood. Han Genger after. He walks again. Ava's radio crackled, making her jump. Richardson, this is base. Status update? She keyed the transmit, grateful for the connection to bureaucracy, to normal procedures, to a world where things made sense. Base, I've located Stewart's camp, abandoned. Evidence suggests he may have made an archaeological discovery. Requesting backup and... She paused. And what? Tell them about the impossible ice, the runes, the photograph of Owen with what looked like a corpse, and possible medical emergency. Something's wrong here. Copy that. What kind of medical emergency? Ava looked at the frozen tent at the journal's final entry. Unknown. Just send backup, please. Nearest team is 4 hours out. Weather service is calling for early snow. You might need to shelter in place overnight. 4 hours. Ava had perhaps 90 minutes of daylight left. The temperature was already dropping. She could feel it. That particular Alaskan cold that seemed to bypass clothing and settle directly into bone marrow. Understood. Will advise. Richardson out. She stood in the growing silence of the subarctic wilderness and made a decision that her 6 weeks of training absolutely did not support. She would follow Owen's trail. The alternative was waiting 4 hours in a camp that felt fundamentally wrong, where the temperature seemed to be dropping faster than physics should allow, where runic stones sat in circles that suggested someone had been very, very afraid. Owen's tracks led northeast, toward a rise in the terrain that the topographic maps labeled simply as Savage Ridge. The tracks were strange. Normal hiking boot treads for the first 100 yards, then something else. Bare feet. Large bare feet pressed deep into tundra, each print surrounded by a ring of frost as if the walker radiated cold. Ava followed, her Garmin GPS logging coordinates, her Apple Watch tracking heart rate that kept spiking above 120. Former tech worker turned ranger, she'd spent the past month learning to navigate by compass and map, to identify bear scat, to recognize hypothermia symptoms. Nothing about identifying supernatural threats. Nothing about what to do when the rational world peeled back to reveal something older and hungrier underneath. The ridge rose sharply, loose scree making every step precarious. At the summit, Ava found what Owen had found. A burial mound. Not large, maybe 8 feet long, 4 feet high, constructed from stones that were wrong for this region. Granite in an area of sedimentary rock. Each stone covered in carved runes so weathered, they looked genuinely ancient. The mound had been opened. Carefully, methodically, the stones removed and stacked with archaeological precision. Inside, empty. But the shape in the earth showed where something had lain for a very long time. Human-shaped, large, and the ground inside the mound was frozen solid, ice crystals forming patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like more runes. Ava's breath caught. The temperature inside the mound was easily 20 degrees colder than the surrounding air. Her phone's weather app showed 34-degree at her ambient. Her infrared thermometer, borrowed from the ranger station's equipment locker, showed 15-degree outers inside the mound. Impossible. Localized temperature differentials didn't work like that. Not without active refrigeration. Not without some mechanism her geology minor from college insisted couldn't exist naturally. A sound behind her. Scraping. Stone on stone. Heavy footsteps. Ava spun, her hand dropping to the bear spray on her hip. 50 feet down the ridge, a figure climbed toward her. Tall, massive, moving with a gait that suggested immense weight, each footfall leaving deep impressions in ground that should have been too hard to compress. As it climbed closer, Ava's brain tried very hard to rationalize what she was seeing into something acceptable. Failed completely. The figure was human-shaped but wrong in every detail. Skin the color of deep bruising, blue-black, mottled with patches of gray-green where decomposition had started and then stopped, frozen mid-process. Body grotesquely swollen, the torso distended like a drowning victim pulled from cold water after days of submersion. It wore remnants of clothing that might once have been armor, leather and metal corroded to almost nothing but still clinging to the frame underneath. Its eyes were milky white, filmed over with cataracts or ice or both, but they tracked Ava with terrible awareness. When it opened its mouth, the jaw distended further than human anatomy allowed, revealing teeth that looked like they'd been filed to points, gums the color of week-old liver. It spoke. Not English. Old Norse, Ava thought, or something close to it. The words rumbling from a chest that shouldn't be able to produce sound because the lungs inside were certainly not functional. Then, horribly, it switched to English. Accented, archaic, but comprehensible. You disturb the hogger. You wake the drogger, foolish. All who open the burial mound suffer the same fate. Ava's training said run. Her 6 weeks of wilderness education said black bears you make yourself big, grizzlies you play dead, but nothing about reanimated Norse corpses. Her legs made the decision for her. She ran. Down the ridge, feet sliding on scree, twice nearly falling, her pack bouncing and the bear spray somehow ending up in her hand though she didn't remember drawing it. Behind her, the thing followed. Not running. Walking, but covering ground impossibly fast, its massive strides eating distance, the sound of its footfalls like boulders tumbling downhill. Ava burst into a stand of stunted spruce and kept running, branches whipping her face, the failing daylight making every shadow a potential threat. Her Apple Watch buzzed. Heart rate 168, abnormal rhythm detected, fall detection asking if she was okay. She ignored it and ran harder. The trees opened onto a clearing and Ava stopped so abruptly she nearly fell forward. In the center of the clearing stood another figure. Human, normal. Owen Stewart, wearing his university fleece, his hiking boots, his glasses reflecting the dying light. "Ava," he called, his voice hoarse. "Thank God. We need to get out of here. That thing, it's been hunting me for 3 days. I've been hiding, trying to survive, but..." "Stay there," Ava said, her voice shaking. "Don't move." Owen's expression shifted to confusion. "What?" "Ava, it's me. We need to run before..." "What's my name?" Ava interrupted. "What?" "Ava Richardson. You're the new ranger. We met at orientation in August." "We never met," Ava said quietly. "You went missing before I started. I've never seen you except in photographs." The thing wearing Owen's face smiled, and the expression was almost right, but not quite, the muscles pulling in wrong sequences. Clever girl. Smarter than the archaeologist. He believed until the very end that I was his discovery, his proof, his ticket to academic glory. Even when I showed him what I really was. It began to change. Owen's form rippling, expanding, the flesh darkening and swelling until the Draugr stood before her in its true shape. Corpse giant, preserved by supernatural cold, animated by something that had been guarding this burial site for centuries. "I am Bjorn Eriksson," it said with that horrible distended jaw. "Died in the year of our Lord 1024, far from home, far from the sea, guarding treasure that is not gold but knowledge, secrets the Christian dogs would have destroyed. I was set to guard this place, was given the Draugr's curse to ensure I never failed. Death is no release. I walk, I guard, I kill." The smell hit Ava then. Decomposition, but cold decomposition, flesh rotting at glacial speed, the stench of a body that had been dying for 1,000 years, but never quite finishing the process. "What did you do to Owen?" Ava demanded, backing away, her hand tight on the bear spray that would do absolutely nothing against something that was already dead. "Ate him," the Draugr said simply. "The old ways. Consumption gives me knowledge, gives me his shape, his words, his memories. I know you now through him. Know you're weak, unprepared, soft, from city life. You will join him. We'll feed the Guardian. We'll become part of what protects this place." It lunged with speed that violated every law of decomposition and rigor mortis. Ava threw herself sideways, hit the ground hard, rolled and came up running. The Draugr's hand, swollen, mottled, fingers thick as tree branches, grabbed her pack and tore it from her shoulders with strength that shouldn't exist in dead tissue. She ran without her gear, without supplies, with only the clothes she wore and the bear spray she still somehow clutched. Ran as the September sun touched the horizon, and the Alaskan wilderness prepared for the long darkness that would eventually become winter. The Draugr followed. Always walking, never running, but never falling behind. Ava could hear it behind her, could hear the wet sound of its breathing, could hear it speaking in Old Norse. Curses maybe, or prayers, or simply the endless monologue of something that had been alone for 1,000 years. She burst through another tree line and nearly ran off the edge of a ravine. Caught herself at the last second, teetered on the edge with her arms windmilling, then stumbled back from the 40-foot drop to a creek below. The Draugr emerged from the trees behind her. Trapped, Ava looked at the ravine, at the thing that had consumed Owen Stewart and intended to do the same to her, and made a decision based on 6 weeks of inadequate training and 28 years of stubborn refusal to accept the impossible. She jumped. The fall seemed to take forever. Long enough to think this is the stupidest thing I've ever done. Long enough to remember her last conversation with her mother, who'd begged her not to take the Alaska posting, to stay somewhere safe. Long enough to regret every choice that had led to this moment. She hit the creek in an explosion of freezing water that drove every thought from her mind except, oh God, cold. The current grabbed her, pulled her downstream over rocks that battered her ribs and legs. Underwater, then surfacing, gasping, then underwater again. When Ava finally managed to grab a rock and pull herself to shore, she was hypothermic, bruised, possibly concussed, and a quarter-mile downstream from where she'd jumped. But alive. The drogger stood at the ravine edge watching with those filmed-over eyes. Then it turned and walked away, not giving up. Ava understood that immediately. It knew the land, knew she was injured, knew the temperature was dropping into the teens. It could afford to be patient. She would die of exposure in a few hours and the result would be the same. Ava pulled herself from the creek, her teeth chattering so hard she bit her tongue. Blood mixing with the creek water she coughed up. Her clothes were soaked. Her phone was dead. Water damage despite the supposedly waterproof case. Her Apple Watch still functioned, showing her heart rate at 45 and dropping body temperature at 94 degrees. Warnings about hypothermia scrolling across the screen. She needed fire, needed shelter, needed to survive the night because backup wasn't coming until tomorrow morning at the earliest, and probably wouldn't come at all if the weather turned. 20 feet from the creek, Ava found a depression under an overhanging rock. Not ideal shelter, but better than open exposure. She crawled inside, her body shaking violently now, the shivering so intense it made coherent thought nearly impossible. Fire. She needed fire. But everything was wet. Her matches were gone with her pack. Her lighter was somewhere at the bottom of the creek. She was going to die in this hole. Die the same way Owen had probably died. Die because she'd been arrogant enough to think 6 weeks of training was adequate for Alaska wilderness in September. No. Ava forced her hands to stop shaking through pure will. She would not die here, would not give the drogger that satisfaction, would not let her mother be right about this being a terrible idea. She stripped off her soaked outer layers, knowing that wet clothing would kill her faster than no clothing. Her core temperature was still dropping. The watch helpfully informed her she was now at 92 degrees ARV, entering moderate hypothermia, in danger of cardiac arrest. Using rocks and her increasingly numb fingers, Ava scraped together dry moss from the underside of the overhang, found dead wood that had stayed somewhat protected from weather. Her hands wouldn't cooperate, couldn't grip properly, couldn't make the fine motor movements necessary for fire starting. She was going to die. The thought arrived with strange calm. Former tech worker turned ranger, dead in Alaska after 6 weeks because she'd been too stubborn to admit she was in over her head. Then light. Impossible light. Green and purple ribbons dancing across the sky, the aurora borealis emerging as full darkness settled over Denali. The light was bright enough to see by, bright enough to illuminate the depression where Ava huddled, bright enough to show her what she'd missed. Someone had been here before, recently. There were marks on the rock wall, runes, but different from the ones at Owen's camp, different from the ones on the burial mound. These looked protective rather than threatening, and beside the runes, almost invisible in the dim light, a cache, wrapped in waterproof material hidden in a crack in the rock. Ava's frozen fingers fumbled it open to find emergency fire starter, space blanket, energy bars, and a note written in Owen's handwriting. If you found this, you're probably running from it. I put these caches throughout the area after I realized what I'd awakened. The runes are protection, Old Norse binding symbols. They won't stop the drogger permanently, but they'll slow it down, make it reluctant to enter. You have maybe until dawn. Use the time. Learn what I learned. The drogger guards knowledge. Specifically, knowledge of something the Vikings found here. Not treasure. Information. Something about the land, about the magnetic fields, about why the aurora is so strong in this region. Owen's notes suggest there's another mound, a larger one 20 miles north. That's where the real secret is buried. The drogger that took me is just the guardian of the guardian. I'm probably dead by the time you read this. Tell my sister I'm sorry. Tell the university my research was right. Tell someone to burn these mounds and salt the earth because what sleeps here shouldn't wake. Good luck. You'll need it. OS. Ava used the fire starter with shaking hands. It took 6 tries, but eventually flames caught, spreading through the dry moss and wood. Heat. Glorious heat. She wrapped herself in the space blanket, fed the fire carefully, and felt her body temperature stabilize at 94 degrees, then climb slowly to 95 degrees. The runes on the wall seemed to glow in the firelight, or maybe that was just her hypothermic brain making patterns from shadows. But the Draugr didn't appear. For hours, as the aurora danced overhead in colors that shouldn't exist, as the temperature dropped to single digits, Ava sat by her small fire and tried to plan. Owen was dead. She was alone. Backup wouldn't arrive until morning, and might not arrive at all if weather prevented helicopter access. She could try to survive until rescue, could huddle here and hope. Or she could do what Owen had suggested. Find the larger mound. Understand what the Draugr was really guarding. Maybe find a way to stop it permanently so no one else would stumble into this nightmare. It was a terrible idea. Possibly the worst idea in a day full of terrible ideas. But Ava had left Seattle because she wanted meaningful work, wanted to do something that mattered, wanted to be more than a cog in a corporate machine. Well, this mattered. This was as meaningful as it got. At 4:47 a.m., with dawn still 2 hours away, Ava left her shelter. The fire had dried her inner layers enough to be functional. Owen's cache had included a backup GPS unit, old model from before smartphones made them obsolete, with waypoints marked. One of them, labeled primary site, was 23 miles northeast. The aurora had faded, but the stars were bright enough to navigate by. Ava walked through Alaskan wilderness in September darkness, following a dead man's GPS coordinates toward something that probably meant her death and felt more alive than she had in years. The Draugr found her at mile 7. It emerged from behind a boulder with that horrible casual patience, as if it had been waiting for her to come this direction, as if it knew where she was going. Persistent, it rumbled in that old Norse-accented English. The archaeologist was persistent too. Died persistent, died screaming, died knowing his knowledge would die with him because the Guardian consumes all. Ava held her ground. Owen's research is already published, online, distributed to dozens of colleagues. Killing him accomplished nothing except proving he was right. The Draugr's filmed eyes fixed on her. The knowledge I guard is not in journals, is not in databases, is here, in the land, in the stones, in the mound that holds what your people would destroy if they knew it existed. What is it? Ava asked. What did the Vikings find here that's worth guarding for 1,000 years? Proof, the Draugr said, that the Christian God is a lie, that the old gods were real, that the Vikings found in this land evidence of Yggdrasil, the world tree, the axis around which reality spins. Here, where the sky dances green. Here, where the magnetic forces are strongest. Here, where the boundaries between worlds grow thin. It took a step closer. Ava could smell it now. Ancient decay, cold rot, the stench of something that had been walking dead for 10 centuries. You cannot reach the primary mound, it continued. You cannot survive another night. You cannot fight what does not tire, does not fear, does not cease. Submit. Join the archaeologist. Feed the Guardian. Let your knowledge and your warmth become part of what protects this sacred place. Ava pulled out the emergency flare she'd taken from Owen's cache, her last one. Or, she said, I burn what you're protecting. Same way I'd burn the mound you came from. Erase 1,000 years of guarding in 30 seconds of fire. The Draugr stopped moving. For the first time, something like emotion crossed that swollen face. Uncertainty. Maybe fear. You would not. The knowledge here is priceless. The knowledge here killed Owen, Ava said. Nearly killed me. We'll kill everyone who comes looking for answers. If burning it saves lives, I burn it. She meant it. The Draugr could apparently read truth in living voices because it made a sound like grinding ice and said, What do you offer? Deal, Ava said, her heart racing. I don't disturb the primary mound. Don't excavate, don't publish coordinates, don't bring anyone else here. In exchange, you stop killing people. You let me leave. You go back to your burial and sleep until someone else is stupid enough to wake you. The Draugr studied her with those terrible eyes. And if I refuse? Then I make sure your 1,000 years of guarding end in fire. If I'm dying anyway, I'm taking your sacred secret with me. Silence. The aurora began again overhead. Green ribbons that made the Draugr's decaying flesh look even more wrong. Ava's finger was on the flare's trigger. One pull, and it would ignite, and she would have maybe 10 seconds to use it before the Draugr tore her apart. Finally, "You speak truth. You would do this." "I would." "Then I offer counter-bargain. You may leave, may live, but you carry message. Tell your people, this land is sacred to the old gods. The mounds must not be disturbed. Those who open them will wake what sleeps, and what sleeps is hungry. Tell them, warn them, make them understand. And if I do this, you let me go? I return to my hogger. I sleep, until the next fool disturbs what should remain buried." It wasn't a good deal. Wasn't even a fair deal. But it was survival. And survival mattered. "Agreed," Ava said. The Draugr nodded once, then turned and walked into the darkness. Within seconds it had vanished, leaving only deep footprints in the tundra and that lingering smell of ancient rot. Ava stood alone in the Alaskan wilderness and shook so hard she nearly dropped the flare. Then she activated Owen's GPS and started the long walk back to his original camp. Rescue found her 14 hours later, hypothermic again, but alive, huddled in Owen's frozen tent wearing every piece of clothing she could find. The helicopter medic wrapped her in thermal blankets and asked what happened. "Owen Stewart is dead," Ava said through chattering teeth. "Fell into a ravine. I found his body but couldn't recover it safely. We'll need a full recovery team." The medic made notes. "And you? You've been missing for almost 24 hours. What happened to you?" Ava thought about the truth, about Draugr and burial mounds and deals made in darkness with things that should not walk. Thought about Owen's request, tell someone to burn the mounds. But she'd made a different deal, had promised to warn, to protect, to keep the secret that Owen had died discovering. "Got lost," she said. "Hypothermia, disorientation. Lucky to be alive." They flew her to Fairbanks to the hospital, to warm beds and IV fluids and concerned doctors who said she was lucky. So lucky that September Alaska showed mercy to the unprepared. 3 days later, discharged and cleared for light duty, Ava sat in her ranger housing and wrote a report. Official version: Owen Stewart deceased in wilderness accident, body unrecovered due to terrain difficulties, recommend closure of Savage River area pending full investigation. Unofficial version saved to an encrypted file on her laptop. Detailed account of everything. The Draugr, the mounds, the deal. Owen's research and his death and the knowledge that Vikings had found something in interior Alaska that proved their gods were more than mythology. She sent the file to Owen's sister with a note. "Your brother was right about everything. I'm sorry. I couldn't save him. But his research matters and someone should know the truth." Then she deleted the file from her computer, burned her handwritten notes, and tried to forget. The nightmares came anyway, Owen's face melting into the Draugr's swollen features, the smell of 1,000-year rot, the sound of footsteps that never tired, the terrible patient certainty of something that had all the time in the world because death was no obstacle. But Ava stayed in Alaska, transferred to a different park after her supervisor expressed concerns about her traumatic experience at Denali. Worked her way through the nightmares, through the hypervigilance, through the way her heart rate spiked every time she saw someone walking with that particular heavy-footed gait. She never went back to Savage River, never spoke publicly about what she'd seen, but she watched the archaeological journals, watched for any mention of Viking sites in interior Alaska, watched for other researchers following Owen's trail, and when they appeared, because they always appeared, ambitious academics chasing tenure and recognition, Ava sent anonymous warnings, detailed, specific, terrifying warnings about what waited in those mounds for anyone foolish enough to disturb them. Most ignored her. A few listened. One thanked her personally, said he'd had a dream about something with blue-black skin and filmed-over eyes, said he was pursuing different research now. Ava counted that as a win. 5 years later, working as a senior ranger in Gates of the Arctic, Ava received a package. No return address. Inside, a piece of carved stone covered in runes and a note in Old Norse that she paid a university professor to translate. The bargain holds, the guardian sleeps. But warn them, other mounds exist. Other guardians walk. Tell your people to leave the old places alone. Some knowledge was meant to stay buried. Ava placed the rune stone on her desk, where she could see it every day, a reminder that the world was larger and stranger than park brochures admitted, that some warnings were given for very good reasons, that the unprepared could survive the impossible if they were lucky and stubborn and willing to make deals with things that should not walk. She never became comfortable in wilderness again, never lost that edge of wariness, that constant awareness that something might be watching from the shadows. But she became good at her job, became the ranger who took threats seriously, who listened to indigenous warnings, who respected the land's capacity for both beauty and horror. And on September nights, when the aurora danced green and purple overhead, Ava Richardson stood outside and remembered Owen Stewart and the drogger that had consumed him, and the deal that had saved her life at the cost of carrying a secret she could never fully share. The world was full of mysteries. Most were beautiful, some were deadly, and the wise learned to tell the difference before opening doors that could never be closed again. Ava had learned, the hard way, but she'd learned, and she was still here, still walking, still warning others about the old places where the dead refused to stay buried. That was enough. It had to be enough. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Your interpretation about the drogger's true nature?